I'd like to welcome everyone to our second budget workshop session. Our first workshop session began with our human resources and staffing presentation, followed by an overview from our Assistant Superintendent for Business, Darren Kenny, talking about revenue trends, tax caps, state aid, and our rollover budget. Tonight we're going to hear from our Assistant Superintendent, Melanie Ward. She's going to present on curriculum and instruction, followed by our Director of Special Education, Elizabeth Woods, on Central Student Services and Special Education, followed by our Director of Student Services, Dr. Pat Von Brogen, to talk about student services and budget projections, and then possibly concluding with Dr. Jeff Kimmer and Matt Kwiatkowski, Director of Technology on Instructional Technology and Data Information Services. If time allows, we will go into a fifth presentation, which would be going back to Melanie Ward regarding school budgets. If time does not permit, we will move that to our budget workshop session number 3. So with that, I'd like to welcome Melanie Ward to give us an overview of curriculum and instruction.
Thank you. Nice to see all of you in person tonight. It's a treat. So I'm going to share with you the highlights of the budget that is connected directly to my office, as well as share with you some of the impacts from the COVID-19 closure and temporary learning models and some things that we're thinking about going into next year as we move forward from that experience. So this is our curriculum mission statement. This was developed a number of years ago by our district standards leaders team, and it's really here to remind all of us that this is what all of the work coming out of the curriculum and instruction office is constantly driving towards, is the accomplishment of this mission on behalf of our students. So in terms of budget coming out of my office, these are the big areas of responsibility. And we're going to take a look at each one of these in a little bit more detail as we go through this quick presentation. So looking at a 5-year history plus the projection for next year from the 5-10 budget, this is the specific curriculum and instruction line. This budget would really be sort of considered my office budget, so it accounts for 2 FTEs, myself and my assistant. This is where we budget for all of the curriculum writing and steering committee payments, so that's work done outside of regular work hours by our standards leaders and teachers to write curriculum, district-wide assessments, and do planning for that kind of work. The bulk of the curriculum writing work, of course, occurs in the summer, although some of it also does occur during the school year after hours. This current school year that we're in, of course, there's been very limited curriculum writing going on due to the constraints on time on behalf of our teachers. My budget also holds approximately $200,000 for district textbook purchasing. That money is offset by New York State textbook aid. That is used for the purchase of core resource materials that we consider as required materials to support instruction across all classrooms in the district. There's also professional learning opportunities that are funded in this budget category, as well as Boces services to support both regular, but to support a number of different areas, including Project Lead the Way, which is our engineering program at the high schools, as well as the intro to that at the middle schools. 3 through 8 assessment scoring, we pay a vendor to do that for us so that we're not pulling teachers out of class for that. Selected software comes out of this budget, and again, professional learning. The standards line, which is the other, probably the secondary big budget that I'm responsible for, really primarily covers the salaries and stipends for the 24 standards leaders. Just to refresh your memory, we have a very unique model in Pittsford in that we have teacher leaders responsible for every curricular area, K-12, rather than having administrators take on those responsibilities. So our standards leaders are, most of them are still teaching in the classroom, full-time or part-time. We do right now have, I think, a total of 3 full-time release standards leaders supporting our program. Our model provides for a great deal of credibility and expertise in the work of curriculum and assessment development. Approximately 95% of this total budget category goes to the salaries and stipends for those standards leaders. And then there's a little bit of money in each area for membership for the standards leaders, supplies for their work, and travel and conference specific to their role as teacher leaders. The 540 code, which is our professional development code, this category supports the Office of the Teacher Center. So this really covers the office itself in terms of Julie Barker's salary, the salary for her assistant, and then the salary for our instructional materials specialist, some supplies, printing services, and membership. Most of the costs of the actual professional learning experiences for our staff come through different budgets, through the Teacher Center grant, the Title II grant, some budget lines in my 510 code, as well as the 511 code, and some Boces work as well. The 470 code, our Boces Teaching Regular Services code, covers a number of items that we contract for Boces with in order to support year-long school work. So we purchase our science kits for elementary science instruction. Through here, we support cultural arts, field trips, assemblies for kids. Of course, we have not been able to do much of that except virtually this school year. We support distance learning. This is the budget that pays for the coordination for our homeschooling program that actually comes out of Pat's office, region scoring, et cetera. So there are a number, this is a bit of a catch-all budget for services that we purchase through Boces to support our regular instructional program. And then we have a separate category for our Boces summer school program. And this really supports students who need to do credit recovery through the Boces Cooperative Summer School Program, or who simply need to retake a Regents exam. That's an option in summer school as well, not to take the course, but to just to retake the exam. We budget, this is a Boces budget where we only pay for the number of kids who actually need to avail themselves of this service. Last year, we saved some money here because we didn't have to send too many kids to summer school because we had no Regents exams, so they didn't have to be making those up. The budget is supported through these various sources. The property tax levy is certainly the largest source of funding for the curriculum and instruction budget, but there are Boces aid on a number of services, as well as the New York State instructional aids for textbooks, library books, software, and hardware. And those are required to be shared with our private schools. So when we shift our gears a little bit from the money and talk a little bit about the impacts that the pandemic had on us, in the spring, starting in March, when we closed down, all instruction was removed to the remote environment. We made the decision to prioritize core area instruction, ELA, math, science, social studies, and world languages, and graduation requirements. We provided approximately 700 devices for students to use at home for remote learning. We suspended grading and assessment practices. State assessments were canceled. AP exams were shortened and put completely online. We developed, with the leadership of the communications office, a COVID website where we put a lot of home learning resources that our kids, particularly in remote learning, our kids and teachers are still referring to for additional experiences to enrich the learning experiences for kids, whether they're at home or in the hybrid model. And we really pretty quickly rallied around the concept of needing to narrow in on some technology platforms last year based on those experiences. So this year, as you're all very well aware, we developed our 3 temporary learning models. Those have been up and running, and I would say, all things considered, highly successful, and I think we have a lot to be proud of there. Every time I'm in classrooms, K-12, I continue to be astounded by the work that our teachers and our students are doing in those temporary learning models. The common tech platforms have been a significant enhancement to our program, and without a doubt, we will continue to support that philosophy and the work and the training around those platforms moving into next year. We had to move all of our in-house professional learning to an online or blended environment during the time of the pandemic. So everything, almost everything that we did in terms of professional learning over the summer, with the exception of our induction program and a couple of specific other opportunities, were done remotely, some of it live, some of it asynchronously. We have this year, thanks to the work of Matt's office, provided about 1,000 devices to families because we had to support not only our kids that were in the fully remote environment, but our secondary hybrid kids had to have a device to be using at home as well. We created instructional roadmaps, and that was a really a significant focus of the curriculum work this past summer, as well as the PD work, so that our instruction is aligned to a greater degree than ever across buildings and across grade levels, and it's all centered around the agreed upon most essential learning standards and skills for every course. We have had to limit some of our supplemental supports, K-12, math lab experiences at the elementary level, instructional challenge, lunchtime help, which is a big source of support at the middle school area, particularly office hours and student assistance. All of that had to be pared back this year due to staffing and space constraints. Our elementary specials have been pared back. 6 of our 9 standards leaders who have release in their contract have taken on additional overages, and so they are teaching up to half-time in the remote environment. Julie Barker has also taken on a remote class, and I mention that only because well, for a couple of reasons. That means they're really walking in the shoes of their remote colleagues and really understanding what that experience has been like, but it has cut back a little bit on the support that they're able to provide to teachers in their standards role. And of course, all of our professional learning has been limited to virtual this year. So it's been a different year for us, of course. We had some unanticipated and so therefore unbudgeted expenses this year to make our learning models work. We provided home learning kits, K-5, to all students. In the event that we had to go fully remote, we wanted to make sure that every student had the basics that they needed at home in order for learning to continue. Those kits alone and putting them together, that was about a $23,000 expenditure to purchase all those materials. Many of those materials will come back to us at the end of this year and will be able to be used as supplies in the classrooms. Zoom licenses, document cameras for our remote teachers. We had to purchase some additional resources to keep learning moving at home on the off days for the hybrid kids. We added additional sections at the elementary level just to accommodate our remote learners, and so we had to purchase additional foundations kits and science materials. So altogether, out of the curriculum budget, we had about a $60,000 unanticipated expense to support the learning models, and that was on top of what came out of the technology budget to support the additional devices to be used at home to support the instructional program as well. We've done a lot of things really well. Things have gone very well. I've highlighted a few of those things for you here. We're still in school. Our kids and our staff are safe and healthy. We are one of the few districts in the area, and I would venture to say probably in the state, where we have had our K-5 kids in school every day, all year long. And we're really proud of the efforts that went in to make that happen, and we see the benefits for the kids. Our preliminary data, as I shared with you a few meetings ago, shows that our kids' academic performance continues to be solid. We have, as I mentioned earlier, greater alignment of our curriculum instruction than we've ever had before. We've embraced new technology tools. We've embraced new instructional practices that will carry us well into the future. And online learning has been very well received by our teachers, and we will be working next week at ILC to think about in what areas do we continue to offer professional learning in an online format, because it's had some real advantages for some of our staff. We don't want to lose that. We were able to offset some costs in order to compensate for some of those expenditures. Again, travel and conference, mileage, contractual, consultant codes use has been way down. And as I mentioned earlier, we've been able to save a little bit of money on some of our Boces services, including summer school last summer. As we think towards next year and what happens after COVID, the post-COVID school life, we know we have a number of things to be planning for. We're going to have to make some very intentional steps to fill any learning gaps that have been created between March 16th of 2020 and the end of this school year, and I've highlighted a few of those for you there. We need to support our staff in thinking about Tier 1 instructional practices to support those learning gaps in their classrooms so that teachers are not feeling like they can't support their kids within the confines of the regular instruction and it all has to be done by someone else, somewhere else. We need to continue to think about equity of access to instructional technology, as that's become more and more integrated into just how we do business in every classroom across the district. And of course, we need to pay particular attention to the social, emotional, and mental health needs of our students and our staff as we return to full time learning for everybody. We also need to continue our focus on our culturally responsive practices, both in terms of our curriculum and our instruction. So while this is intertwined with our work on COVID, it's also somewhat separate and needs to be highlighted in terms of what we're planning for out of my office as well, as we think about how we're using the resources that we have available to us. So looking towards next year, these are the, this is the proposed budget in each of the categories that I've covered in this quick presentation. And you can see in the two biggest areas, 510, and the next slide is 511, the breakdown in terms of the proportionality of how that money is used: salary, textbooks, professional learning, equipment, contractual needs, and then kind of a collective category for other. In the 510, again, this is the kind of my office budget. And then 511, as I mentioned earlier, this is the standards budget, and about 95% of this goes to the staffing. So overall, we look at this year's budget versus the proposed budget for next year, and we're looking at a requested increase of about a 1.1% in the area of curriculum and instruction. Any questions?
Just have a quick comment, Melanie.
Yeah.
PowerPoint doesn't do justice to what you showed on that slide, and I wish there was a way for me to articulate what all of that means. But I don't know of any other assistant superintendent, I've never met one, that would be here late at night and making those kits that goes home and seeing you there, putting them all together, and doing that on your own time. And it just speaks to your heart, and it's a small example of how your work is not just the work of the district, but it's a passion that you have for our family. So
Thank you.
for that and all you've done and more, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm going to be sharing with you an overview of the proposed budget for the special education component of the central services budget. So just for a little bit of background, the special education department provides programs and services to all of our preschool and school-age students who reside in the district. We arrange and recommend services for preschool students and provide the services for school-age students. In addition to that, we also work to foster an overall inclusive culture by working to provide supports in general education settings for our students, and also provide other activities for the community at large to help build a culture of inclusion for our district and community. So just for some trend data, we are continuing to show a steady increase in the number of students in the district who receive special education supports. Over the past decade, we've been gradually increasing each year. I also just wanted to show one data point of many that we review when we look at how we're doing toward our goal of fostering an inclusive culture. So this is just one piece that we look at the percentage of students who are receiving special education services, but who are in general education settings for essentially their full day. So we have shown an increase very intentionally as we look to program for kids in general education as much as possible. And we're up to about 64% of our students in general education settings. So we're proud of our movement in that area. So for some budget history and to look at the proposed budget for the upcoming school year, the central services budget for special education is covered in 3 areas. The first area is the special education office, which covers the district office team, both clerical and administrative, interpreters, contracts, legal fees, as well as our summer evaluations and CSE meetings. The second area includes our speech language therapists and adaptive physical education teachers. The majority of our special education providers, including teachers and paraprofessionals, are all included in their building budgets, but the district-based budget includes speech language therapists and adaptive physical education. So this category encompasses approximately 17 to 18 teachers per year. The adaptive physical education staffing varies depending on individual student needs, and these individuals provide supports to students across all 9 of our buildings. This also includes their materials and supplies. And in addition, we also include Medicaid licensing fees for our speech language pathologists. We support them with keeping their licenses current so that we can seek Medicaid reimbursement for eligible services. The third area covers a very large number of programs and services, so this is the most significant area in our budget. These are our outside placements and services, which include Boces programs, private New York State approved special education school programs, all of the Boces services that we provide to students who attend private schools within Pittsford, and also all of our physical therapists and occupational therapists who serve all of our kids in the district. We work with Boces for those as well. So this category includes a large range of programs and services. We have 3 special education specific revenue sources that help to offset the costs of special education programming. The first is our federal grant. We receive, you'll see the trend of our federal grant allocations each year. It's difficult at budget planning time because we don't receive our allocations for our federal grant until late in the spring. And we don't have a way of necessarily predicting what the allocation will be, but you'll see that they've been relatively flat over the years. So this helps to support our special education functions, some of our specialized services, and supplies. We are also required to allocate a certain percentage of this grant to the private schools in Pittsford, as well as to approved special education schools. The second source of budget support, of revenue support for special education, is Medicaid reimbursement. We are permitted to claim Medicaid reimbursement for certain specific services that are listed here. The most recent total that we received in a school year was for the 1920 school year, and that was just over $70,000. Our remote learning period last spring did have some impact on our Medicaid claiming, but it was fairly small. So we're still pretty close to expected what we could claim last year, and our current school year claiming is on track to be similar as well. Finally, there are a couple of different state aid reimbursement areas that provide reimbursement for higher cost special education programs. So this gives you the grand total of these types of aid that we received. We received them a year later. So this $720,000 total was for the 18-19 school year, but we received it last year, for example. We are anticipating about an $80,000 reduction in our aid as a result of the remote learning period last spring because of some of the claiming changes that occurred during that time. So to just review a couple of the impacts of the pandemic on our expenditures, there were some areas in which we saw some increases in certain budget codes as a result of the pandemic. So for example, in the spring, obviously we transitioned to fully remote instruction and all of our processes and procedures. So that resulted in some additional software needs. And I talked about the reduction in our high cost aid, which has an impact. We also saw an increased need for legal support for special education as we were working to make sure that our students were receiving all of their mandated programs and services. We were receiving ongoing, evolving, and changing guidance from both the federal government and state ed. So we were working closely with legal counsel just to make sure that we were following all of those procedures appropriately as we tried to support our students. During the current school year, we've seen an increased staffing need for special education teachers as a result of supporting kids who chose the fully remote learning model. So those were some new hires and some overages for existing staff. We also purchased PPE for special education. In addition to the PPE purchased by the district at large, we had some specific needs around staff who provide direct personal care to individual students, clear masks for students who are deaf or hard of hearing, and plastic barriers for some of our closer one-on-one services, for example. We also saw some budget codes that had decreased expenditures during this time period. Consistent with the other departments, we had a reduction in paper and mailings, mileage, travel, and conference. We incurred no expenses in the spring in those areas. We also ran our extended school year program, which is our summer program, remotely last summer, which resulted in lower costs since we didn't have students who went to Camp Arrowhead or had transportation or nurses, for example. We are continuing to have decreased costs for mileage and travel and conference during the current school year as we try to work as remotely as possible. In addition to the budgetary impacts, the impacts on students and services, we have been able to provide the majority of our special education programs and services fully in the remote and hybrid environments during this time. And we've also seen the majority of our students continue to make progress toward their individual goals. We also were able to prioritize students who receive special education services to be able to come in for 4 in-person days per week in the hybrid model based on individual programs and needs. We were not able to do that for every student who received special education, but we did prioritize a number of students to be able to come in for more in-person time. In addition, we've developed procedures to make sure that we're monitoring and providing students who need makeup services as a result of having a loss of service at any point in time, and developing temporary plans to make sure that we're working closely with parents when we've had to make adjustments to students' plans. Finally, we've had teachers and actually parents, several parents today, in fact, who have reported seeing some increased independence among their students during the pandemic as a result of needing to be more taking care of technology needs, learning remotely, learning in the hybrid model. So there have been some unanticipated benefits for some of our students who have learned to be more independent and use their technology more fluently. But we have also have had certain students who have struggled with remote learning and who have required some additional instructional supports or social emotional supports. And we do anticipate those needs continuing into the upcoming school year as well. So as a summary of the Central Services Special Education budget, these numbers include the reduction of a part-time office clerk during the regular school year in the district office, as well as a reduction, an ongoing reduction for next year in our travel and conference, mileage, office supplies, and copy paper. Because we've moved to primarily remote and electronic procedures, we will be able to sustain those decreased expenditures even following the pandemic, and we're continuing to minimize travel into next year as well. And again, I talked about we're proposing an increase to the legal fees budget to help support us and bring that particular area in line with the expenditures that we've had over the past year or so. Are there any questions?
Elizabeth, I just have to make a comment similar to Melanie's that your PowerPoint makes it look easy. But our community is so fortunate to have a director of special education that is so dedicated to inclusion of our students. And during this pandemic, we've had some real rare instances where we weren't sure how to provide services or how to bring students in. And you were such an advocate to increase services and to find a way to bring students with IEPs in 4 days a week. So. Our parents and our community are fortunate to have you, and so are we. So thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see everybody. So I am going to present information about the Student Services Department budget, and I think you'll hear some common themes with some of the other central services budgets as well. We'll talk a little bit about the responsibilities of the department, some of the budget history, pandemic impacts, and then what we're proposing for the next school year. So the department budget 520 Student Services is our central office. It includes 4 people: director, a teacher on special assignment who is a psychologist in our district who was assigned to the department last year, thankfully. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Our central registrar and our administrative assistant. And this covers the basics of the office: supplies, materials, some consultants, and travel and conference, which really did not get used this year. Oops, sorry, wrong way. Just by way of background, here are some of the areas that our our district office is involved in. And we really have direct responsibilities in some of these areas and indirect responsibilities in some of these areas. The Student Services Department essentially touches everything that goes on related to students in our district, and this is just a summary of some of the things that you might be familiar with in terms of this work. The 440 code is special or specialized services, and this includes the English language learning teachers, our ELL teachers. It includes 5 of the 6 behavior specialists. There are some of those positions that are covered in grants. The school physician, our prevention coordinator, career internship, variety of mental health services, and again, supplies, materials, and conference. So this is an area that has direct impact on our students. Then we have the 460, which is the non-public component of the budget. These are areas that are required from a regulatory perspective based on various formulas, and the funds to that are harbored in my area. The direct relationship one for my office is the health services, and this is the nursing services that we provide for the private schools that are within our boundaries. So Allendale Columbia, St. Louis School, and we have a relationship with Trinity Montessori, which is a smaller school in terms of nursing services. The Essa title funds, the Every Student Succeeds Act, these are our title funds, and we receive 4 funds in this area. I'm going to go into a little bit of a detail on those so we have a better understanding of that. But this graphic gives you a general understanding of the trends in this area. You'll note that the green bars indicate Title IV, which really was a newer receipt for us, and that started in the 18-19 school year. The largest of these grants is the Title I grant, and you can see the decline in that over the years presented here. Most of these are based on enrollment, and the title grant is based upon the number of students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch and other services. So before the pandemic, generally our grants did these things. The Title I grant, historically we've provided reading services, additional social work services to the schools who are identified to receive these funds. There are a variety of requirements for the Title I services, and one in particular is supplement versus supplant. So we need to make sure that the services that we're providing at the identified schools supplement the services that the district is providing generally to all other schools. Title II is generally a professional development grant, and we use that extensively for teachers and administrators to either go to conferences or we bring people here to the district to provide training, etc. Title III is for our ELL program. It's a smaller grant, but we generally use it for supplies and materials and some training, etc. And Title IV, which was the newest grant over the last couple of years, we have targeted that for social emotional learning and safety priorities. The asterisk there that you'll see on that slide indicates that we have various requirements to allocate funds also to the private schools in our area for 1, 2, and 4, and also for private schools where our students attend outside of our boundaries in Title I. So with the title grants, from our closure in March to September, we looked at each of the grants to determine how we were spending those. In Title I, most of the funds were expended because they were linked to services, again, reading services, social work services. In Title II, when we had services such as our relationship with Dr. Heatley from the University of Rochester Medical Center that continued to support us, our kids and families through the closure, those services continued. Other things that we would have done, such as conferences, travel, et cetera, was all paused. Title III and IV, we generally use some of those funds for supplies and materials. So I share that with you because I'm trying to look at ways that we can rework those funds to address some of the needs that we're having now and predicting for the future. So we literally just received information from the state about carryover and final allocations. They were a little bit delayed in approving grants this year, so we're just getting that, even though they were in over the summer. And our goal now is to look at how we can use the grants within the requirements of the grants to help in areas that we feel are needed going forward. I also wanted to share with you a few things that we had done fortuitously before the pandemic occurred, and I think Mr. Leone talked about a few of these when he presented the last time. The change in our nursing services structure has been significant. The fact that we now have 2 nurses in each of our schools has been invaluable during this pandemic. When you think about obviously the medical issues that are going on, but also the tracking of information and students and who is on quarantine and when are they returning, et cetera, we are just so fortunate to do that. So I thank the board for your approval of that process as we did that last year. We also added additional behavioral specialists that year, which has taken us through some of these very difficult times with the closure, and our total mental health staff have done an outstanding job ever since that time in mid-March when we all had to shift and change what we're doing. The assignment of a teacher on special assignment or a psychologist on special assignment to the Student Services Department has also helped us to keep going on some of our SEL and mental health work that we've done. So those were critical to help us get through what we've been working on. You can see some of the other things we had initiated. Certainly the online registration system was very helpful. And thanks to Jeff's department and the data team for working with us on that we were able to go remotely at the same time we were rolling out the online registration system. And so that helped families a great deal, and also it helped us stay on top of our enrollments. Some of the other things we had started already certainly were put on pause, but we're back to working on them. Some of the impacts that we saw from the pandemic, we worked with, every duty had to be changed, as we know. The nurses really were helpful with all the medical information. All of our mental health staff gathered information on all of our students and families that may have needs while we were out of school. We established key contacts around the community, and we stayed in touch with all the families that we felt were need or have asked us for need. During July to current, our office participated in developing a variety of health and safety protocols, training, and procedures. We also worked on acquiring PPE. I want to thank our Safety Council, because there was a long period of time that we actually met weekly in order to look at all the protocols, address the safety questions and concerns that have come up, and make sure that we were moving in the right direction. Other items that we have listed there are all the things that we are either doing or had done as of July 1. Like everyone else, we had to pivot the things that we're doing, so our mental health staff did their remote contacts with families. Our standards leaders in the areas that I am involved with, we met weekly to process all the information, make sure we were staying on top of things. With gratitude to the Pittsford Education Foundation, we were able to distribute grocery cards to families who had need. And also with gratitude to the Pittsford Food Pantry, they were terrific in helping us make sure that all the families of the students who attend our schools, even if they didn't live in our community, had access to the pantry. We tried to share information and resources with staff and families. We initiated a Wellness Connection newsletter that there were several iterations over the closure. And we helped to develop parts of the plan for SED that were related to the student services area. We also did some support training for our staff, did a series of lunch and learns related to returning in September after being off and some of the questions that they may have around returning. We have continued to refine all our safety protocols, and we do daily monitoring of all things related to COVID and daily reporting with Jeff's office again to the state and other places with related to that. We had to pause some things, so our policy work was paused initially. Those are the areas there that we're working on. We had also done some mental health analysis and development of changes, as well as some safety processes that were paused. And I'm excited to share with you that we're coming back again to the vast majority of those things at this point in time. Other expenditures we had, similar to others, buying additional PPE after we had completed our work, and there were some specialty items that were needed. Homeschooling increased during this time period, and so there were additional costs to Boces, and additional counseling so that we can meet the needs of the students who are in the elementary remote program. Like the others, we did not expend funds in this area. So here is the proposed budget for the overall department. The 520 budget is at about a 9% decrease. The special services budget is about I think it's a 12% increase, and that is focused on mental health services as well as additional ELL services. Our numbers of English language learners has increased, so we will need to do that. The non-public area is down about 10%, and that's primarily related to less funds needing to go to charter schools. These are just graphics of the areas for each of those. That's the 520, gives you a sense of where the predominant expenditures are, and it's basically in the salaries for our small office area. We also do some contracted services out of this budget. There's the non-public, which again has the nurses for the private schools. The specialized services, again, that direct service for the ELL teachers, behavior specialists, various health services, our school physician, et cetera, are in this area. So looking at what we need to do as we move forward into 21-22, we really need to focus in on areas that others have also talked about, addressing the needs of our students related to anxiety. Some of our students are going to struggle with re-entry. We've got transitions of students, 5th to 6th, 8th to 9th, K to 1, 2 to 3. All of the areas of transition are just going to be very different and challenging for some of our students. And as others have stated, we have some of our students who have done better in the home environment and may have found school to be an anxiety-producing situation. So returning for them may be difficult. And then the opposite. Some students are finding the home environment or learning at home very difficult and needing help to transition back to school. We are looking to address learning gaps in our students, as well as we're on board to continue our policy work, code of conduct, et cetera. And then again, shifting those grant priorities, trying to make maximum use of those dollars so that we can put in some of these supports and services so that we assist students and staff as we all transition back. I shared with you in your materials just some information about embedding social emotional learning into all the things that we do, outlining some of the areas that would make that happen as we go forward and ways we'd like to use some of our funds, as well as addressing mental health needs of students and of our staff. It's very important that we think about how we're supporting staff as we not only continue through this model, but we move into our 21-22 school year. An additional area is really looking at safety needs. We need to continually look at our protocols and how we're dealing with those situations as requirements and situations change. Need to look also at physical and emotional safety throughout all of this. Also, health issues post-COVID. We need to be mindful of how people are doing who have had COVID and then have recovered. You may have heard about the term long haulers and brain fog. About 10% of those individuals who have had COVID have lingering effects, and so that will affect our students and staff going forward. Continue our work on equity, diversity, and inclusivity, not only from a policy perspective, but the code of conduct, the work outlined in our climate survey, and really continually engaging our community partners in that work. So with that, I would open to any discussion or questions that you might have.
Thanks so much, Pat.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in hearing more about reentry challenges and opportunities that we might have. It's a fascinating topic I hadn't given a ton of thought to yet, but you know, the day will come, and that it's already on your radar is comforting. But
Yeah.
I'm interested in learning more about what those challenges might be and what opportunities there might be for us as well.
Well, interestingly enough, we had a meeting today with Dr. Heatley, having some of that conversation, and also beginning to look at the feedback that was shared through parents, staff, and students in the check-in survey that we just had. So I think going forward, pretty soon, we'll have a lot of detailed information to share with you, but also identifying what ways for our students are we able to help them with this transition. Again, looking at some students are happy at home and happy at school, dealing with that on an individual basis. We'll be working with all of our mental health staff to identify those students and then put together individual plans.
And also share some of that with in the budget guidelines tonight.
Yeah. And the whole transition piece, right? Every grade level, it's a very different transition. I think we have to be very mindful of that. Yeah.
So Pat, before you leave, I just have to, I'm so happy you did not retire last year. So
I am too.
So you're retiring this year in the face of a pandemic, and I think the community needs to fully understand how vital your role was into supporting so many people in so many different ways. So when we started with Pittsford Education Foundation and collected, I think $60,000 of cards for groceries, you worked hand in hand with me. You didn't have to. You volunteered it because you wanted to, because that's in your heart. And you took over a big part of that so that you can get families what they needed on a regular basis. The other thing is, in schools, it's no different than any other organization, that there's psychological tolls that a pandemic has on people. And part of having people come back is making them feel safe to come back. And that's been a big role that you played from March until September, is working with the health and safety weekly and answering the most detailed questions possible, as far as how many minutes between disinfection do we have to get to. And you did it, and you made people feel comfortable coming back. Our nurses have a huge load on them this year. Their roles have changed significantly, and you've worked with them hand in hand. We have both taken on a significant level of contact tracing together. And I don't think I've ever talked to any administrator more on weekends than I have with you this year. And
I've never talked to the health department as much as I have.
So just know that during this last year and it being a pandemic, I think it's apropos for this being your last year, because it coincides with your level of passion and compassion and empathy and serving others. So you certainly have gone above and beyond this year. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And Jeff and Matt, feel free to go through your full presentation. We'll start the board meeting when you're done. Yeah. This is the same Zoom link, right, for the regular board meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello. So a lot of what was already said today kind of covers what we're talking about. And
Matt, you can take your mask off while you present if you're comfortable with that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of what we talked about today in this presentation is what a lot of them have already said. And really our budget here is going to talk about 3 areas: technology, data and assessment, and then really Boces support services. First, kind of looking back at some of the background information on technology services, we're responsible for the support and maintenance of both technical and instructional systems that are leveraged throughout our district. We also support and maintain not only the devices that you see here, but also a lot of systems that are being used on the back end to support our learning on a day-to-day basis. So here you're seeing some things like computers, phones, tablets, interactive panels, copiers, Wi-Fi, servers. We also work directly with our teachers, our staff, administration, students to support a lot of the technology that's being used on a daily basis. My team, including our instructional staff behind me, work tirelessly, endlessly hours on creating new methods of providing professional development on new and emerging technologies. We work with standards leaders to integrate technology into the curriculum, and it's just countless ways of innovative and new ways of thinking about providing this. And that's all done through 15 full-time staff members, 1 administrator, 1 admin assistant, 8 technicians, 4 instructional technologists, and 1 AV supervisor.
Good evening. I have the privilege of supervising the data and assessment department. We call ourselves the data team. I think you've heard of us multiple times, but for the community, our main responsibility is state reporting almost on a daily basis, if not weekly. We do quite a bit with data and data privacy these days with the new 2D law that's recently come on board the last year or so, and I know I've shared that with the board. We have a website on our department page if you want to learn more about the 2D law. But we also maintain student assessment data. We do a lot of processing of the assessment data, including Regents exams and 3 through 8 assessments. And we certainly assist a lot, quite a bit with attendance tracking and the development of our student schedules across all 9 schools. We assist with district-wide surveys. I use the graduate survey as an example. And in our department, there's 5.5 of us, including, of course, myself, my administrative assistant, 3 data liaisons who support our systems, and 1 part-time assessment clerk who helps with some of that assessment data.
And the last piece of our pie is really this Boces support services, and this really encompasses a number of things more than just what's going on within our department, right? So it's going to be the WinCap, and within WinCap we've got the finance that it reaches, the human resource component of it, and as well as professional development. We also have Infinite Campus, IEP Direct, SNAP, and Office 365 and other services. And a lot of that, like I said, it goes beyond just technology services and goes to other departmental areas. And as we take a look at the 5-year trend and look at the budget history, we see that technology services has been pretty flat and consistent over the last several years. Last year, or really this year, you'll see an increase. And that increase was due to some priorities that we kind of shifted over to, one being the emergency alert system that we implemented, as well as we also put in place some back-end monitoring of our network to understand the health of it and just the security and cybersecurity and what's going on. And the proposed budget for next year, you'll see, is pretty flat from last year and actually just a slight decrease from last year. This is broken down into a number of different categories that it supports: salaries, instructional services through Boces, equipment through Boces, categorical aid for hardware and software, and also equipment charges.
For my part of the department, the structure looks a little bit different. We have about 95% of our revenue that goes towards the expenses of human resources. And so you'll see a very slight increase that we're proposing for next year, and that's all relative to salaries.
And the last piece of this is as I mentioned, the Boces support services. And Boces here, you can see that for the last 2 years, it's been pretty flat, and the proposed for next year is going to also continue to be relatively flat from year-over-year increases. And there are a number of different areas that help support our budget. The first is through categorical aid for hardware and software, and that is based on a per pupil allocation. We get a certain amount of money based on the enrollment within our district. Second would be purchases through Boces that generate state aid the following fiscal year. And then the last piece of it would be the technology reserve, which is essentially a savings account that's approved by the voters that is going to hold funds for strategic purchases that help supplement the general fund budget. The note that I want to put in here is that the voter approval is required to withdraw anything from that technology reserve. And then we do have some complementary revenues that we can pull upon at various times. So Smart Schools Bond Act, once that's gone, that's no longer available to us in federal E-rate. And these can be used to purchase outside of the general fund expenses. With the pandemic impact, as Melanie and everyone else has mentioned, it's really taken a toll on all of us. And technology, as I've listened to their presentation, it seems like we've all been a part of it all. And putting devices into kids' hands, putting in new programs, implementing new systems, coming up with a way of supporting our faculty, our staff, our community, figuring out ways to make these events possible. It's all been at the forefront of what we've been doing on a day-to-day basis. And you know, it's just new ways of thinking, and it's been fun. It's been challenging. It's been trying, but we're working through it all.
For us in the data team, when the pandemic started, we were able to work from home and continue business on the various duties that I spoke of earlier, doing a lot through video conferencing. Whereas our work definitely changed after July. We shifted from things like data and assessment to more of state reporting and health screening, as many of you have received the email messages or screened on the way in today, and working with Pat's office on reporting for any COVID tests that we've been doing, and certainly looking at the masks and protocols and everything else different while at our desk. So it's felt different and the work's been different, but we definitely have made that swap and have moved forward, leveraging those existing human resources that we've already had. The only thing I would be mindful as a board is we probably will have to continue on with the Qualtrics health screening tool, most likely into the summertime when we have our summer events, including extended school year, and possibly into the fall. Certainly hoping that we don't have to, but we should probably plan just in case. As I finish with this couple of slides, because I know we're short on time, just this slide brings the three budget cost centers that Matt started with and that I spoke of, the instructional services technology budget that Matt spoke of. We get a little breakage on some retirements that we've had in our department, so it's actually a change and decrease with the overall budget. For the instructional services data and assessment, it's gone up a tiny bit because of those salary obligations. And then with Boces, us working in conjunction with Leanne, our Director of Finance, we have worked also with Boces to flatten our costs with Boces, some of those services that Matt spoke of. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Matt, and you can ask any questions that you would like of us. Thank you.
I just want to comment. I'm in awe listening to all the presentations tonight, but rarely do we think about a data team being so instrumental in direct instruction and health and safety for our district and our community. And when I think about the work that you've both done within your departments, it's ranged from supporting teachers and families and everything from tutorials to hands-on to one-on-one instruction to learning how to be in the remote world, to setting up daily morning screenings, tracking that data, making phone calls, to staying on top of keeping our district safe with emergency alert systems moving forward. The amount of testing that we've done this year, I think we've had 2,600 tests approximately, and By far, I know that we are a model for how we did that, and I know that other districts across the state have reached out to Dr. Kimmer for support in all of the database tracking and in all the areas that we're required to report. But your departments have impacted our community in a big way, which they don't see. And so I'm so pleased of your expertise and your willingness to go above and beyond. For the board, just to know, I've called Matt late at night many times around many different issues around technology. I've called Jeff probably almost every weekend with requests, and he's always here. He's always responsive, and the community needs to know that as well, that you've kept us safe, you've kept us secure, and you've helped our students and staff and community all around. So thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Good evening again. If we could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May I have an approval of the agenda, please? Thanks, Robin and Pete. Any edits? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Principals report and assistant principals report. Hi, Sutherland High School.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
We have Mr. Mark Puma here, and we also have our assistant principals from Sutherland High School. Welcome to our board meeting. Thank you so much for hosting us last 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago. I'm losing track of time.
Yeah, it was 2 weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago. I'm not
It
sure.
was 2 months, 2 weeks, 2 minutes. But thank you for hosting us, and it was certainly our pleasure to be with you. So we're looking forward to your presentation tonight.
Well, thank you,
And
everyone.
Mark, feel free to take your mask down too if you want. It's up
Oh,
to you.
Thank
While
you.
you present.
Wow, thank you. So
The little treats in life.
I was going to say this. We've done this in 10 months. Hope there's nothing in my teeth. Well, thanks for having us, everyone, and thank you for coming by earlier this month and spending time with us, taking time out of your personal schedules to spend time with us. It's that kind of support that we're always feeling, and we very much appreciate your continued support. So this presentation will essentially be in 3 parts. I'll spend a few minutes talking about the year in review. It's actually been a while since we've been here, but I'll go back to essentially when we closed in the spring and talk about the events that led into the summer and into the fall and winter. I'll then hand it over to Assistant Principal Jennifer Marin. We'll also talk about the instructional practices within the TLMs. And then the third part will be presented by Assistant Principal Dr. Summer Case, where she'll talk about instructional social emotional learning and how that's embedded in our practices. So when we made the shift to fully remote in the spring, the entire district, we focused on safety first, and we've been doing that ever since. So it forced us to take a good look at our physical plant, just in the building and how it's laid out and how we can safely get people, students and staff in and out, and make sure that they have all the resources they needed in order to go to that shift in fully remote. So in addition to the material resources, rethinking our instructional practices, it was essentially the very beginning of just looking at everything very differently, and we've been doing that ever since, constantly reflecting on our practices. One of the important things we did in the spring, we did this within the building and across buildings, was identifying essential learning within courses. So we had teachers of same courses looking carefully at their practices, setting the pacing of instruction and the expected outcomes for our students, doing that in teams within the building and across the district. And again, that was the precursor for a lot of collaborations that were occurring across the district. We wanted to optimize our instructional resources and look carefully at especially our remote practices. And in that sense, just like everybody else, we were building the plane while we were flying it and really trying to maintain the commitment that we always have to delivering high quality instruction and maintaining the integrity of our programming, while at the same time just hanging on to that sense of community that we pride ourselves on at Sutherland High School. It was very important, as in addition to keep everybody safe, making sure that we're maintaining the integrity of our instructional practices, that we also maintain that sense of community as a building. So coming out of the spring, we were looking at unprecedented challenges for our students, and we quickly worked together to identify what those look like on an individual basis for our students. We took a look at how we can come together, identify those gaps that our students were experiencing, design individualized interventions for those students, and then putting a lot of folks into place. And we had a lot of support from the district to do that in terms of bringing back teachers and paraprofessionals, administrators, counselors, clerical support, and essentially using our library in a way we had not used before. So we're kind of using it in different ways throughout, so that we can bring students in, provide them the instruction and the resources that they needed, and then in a way that made sense to them, and did that throughout the beginning of this summer. All the while trying to hang on to anything that we could in terms of celebrating our seniors. Thank you very much for attending our unprecedented graduation. It was the first ever graduation ceremony at the main entrance of Sutherland High School. And as I reflected back on that experience, just the community coming together, and just the support that we all felt, and the resiliency that we saw in our students and staff and everyone, was just unbelievable. Just turning something that was so unusual and uncomfortable into something so positive was wonderful. And then there was a lot of road mapping, instructional road mapping work that occurred in the summer, and that was built upon the work that was done in the spring in identifying the essential learning for the courses. So those instructional roadmaps were, among other things, an effort to try to align the instructional experiences for our remote and hybrid students. And that work continues in our PLC collaboration. So we have teachers working together, again, within the building and across buildings, at least every Wednesday afternoon, to take a look at things like how we're delivering instruction and the pacing of the instruction, how we're assessing our students, et cetera. So that takes us into the school year, and again, just looking very carefully at our physical plan in very different ways. How are we going to get students in and out of our building in a safe way, so that we're not congesting any single area and moving them safely around the building? That goes for the adults as well. So we looked at arrival and dismissal procedures, not only how we were getting the kids into the building or out of the building, but also where they landed, and making sure that we were ensuring the safety protocols. And that also made our lunch look very different too. So our multi-purpose room turned into an extension of our cafeteria, so that we have essentially two lunches happening simultaneously, and how we're getting students into those spaces, and trying to maintain some kind of normalcy and that camaraderie that you see at lunch, while at the same time rethinking how we supervise students and provide the support in those settings was very important. And also at the same time continuing to look at our practices. The way we started in the school year and the way things look now are very different. We learn things along the way, and we're very carefully looking at how our instructional spaces are used and continue to be used, and not only that, how we're preserving instructional time and making sure that while the students are in the building, that we're keeping them in those classrooms, and doing so in a way that makes most sense given the space that we have. And that leads us to the ongoing and evolving practices that we have in instruction, how we're delivering counseling services and instructional SEL, which then our assistant principals will talk about right now.
Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm going to speak around our instructional models at Sutherland, as well as we really wanted to shine a light on our counseling department and the incredible work they've done. So what does instruction look like in our temporary learning models at Sutherland? And when we talked about it as a team, what we realized was, because we started to think about it as separate. So there's the hybrid remote model where kids are in the building 2 days a week, some students 4, and then there's the fully remote. But what we realized is there's a lot in common with those models. And in many ways, those commonalities represent growth. Mark said about being flexible. Nothing is static in this model, and there's been tremendous growth in our building, and it's things that potentially we're going to be hanging on to as we transition. So for both hybrid and remote and fully remote, there's been a successful transition to teams, which is saying a tremendous amount. And as, end of story. No, it's just so impressive. And as we've had the privilege of observing teachers and observing remote sections of classes, the use of teams and the rich use of teams and the continuing evolution of teams has been a tremendous strength. And I know that the entire district has been involved in supporting this transition for our secondary teachers. There's been innovative use of technology such as Delta Math and Forms. And it's interesting with something like Forms in Microsoft Office in that it might present as, oh, this is a good way to do a survey. But it actually becomes a really great way to do both formative and summative assessments. So it's really evolved in the teacher's hands, again, demonstrating that flexibility, utilizing that PLC time on Wednesdays to share best practice, and also collaborating with their Mendon colleagues as well. Because it all ties into commitment to adhering to those roadmaps and alignment between the models. So now we've got these roadmaps and looking at essential learning and all these discussions evolving around that. And that does naturally build towards even deeper collaboration between so the whole social studies department, the whole English department, and not just vertical but horizontal. And that's all been kind of a part of these temporary learning models as they've been implemented. And another thing within both is the ability to connect with students working remotely, whether fully remote or hybrid remote, via Zoom, face-to-face, and just a lot of different iterations of that. So that's really common to both models. So then for the hybrid remote at Sutherland, and this is a picture from a science classroom. So this is our, typically the students are in 2 days a week. The days they're in the building, they're doing a variety of things, as you can imagine. There might be direct instruction, guided practice. They're collaborating with classmates, which is this was an opportunity to kind of check your thinking with your neighbor. We see that a lot. Safely, maintaining the distancing and the masking. There's opportunities for in-person assessment. There's opportunities to collaborate, and there's opportunities to present to peers, which has also been ongoing and pretty powerful in person. Wednesdays typically is an opportunity for, in that hybrid remote, for the whole class to be together for that 1 day a week where every student is there together kind of as a community face-to-face. And it's utilized in a variety of ways depending on the discipline. I've also seen it utilized for some one-on-one targeted instruction, writing conferences, that kind of a thing. So it can also become a tier 2 intervention or an enrichment depending on what's going on in the class for that week. For the days that students are home in hybrid remote, that synchronous instruction, that's typically can be an expansion of what they did in school. It can also be preparing them for that next in-person day, but they're very, very closely aligned. So those days of the hybrid and the remote in that model. So this is the, for the fully remote, this is a picture, and this is why I have my crumpled cheat sheet, but this is our financial planning class from the fully remote model. And all of the students in this class got their WISE financial literacy certification, fully remote. It's pretty remarkable. So this is what our excellent fully remote model looks like for our students. So I just wanted to, that's one of many, many examples that we have of excellence. All of our, in terms of Sutherland, I would say all of our fully remote sections are combined with Mendon. So initially, the focus was on community building, and it has been incredible to see because you've got students who are, you're going to have new students every year, but now these are students who are from the other high school, and the teachers are managing dual rosters, right, kind of dropping in and out of the schools, and it has been incredible to see our teachers also then work with the teams at Mendon, right? Reach out to that counselor, to that administrator. So there's been a lot of teaming and collaborating that has come from that community building in the fully remote model. There's been even more innovative technology stuff that I know the three of us have seen that we are really impressed by. Multiple screens. I've seen the chat used as a shared inquiry and able to capture the notes. Students have been put in charge of, say, a gizmo lab demonstrating mastery and proficiency for their peers. Private channels and teams for individualized feedback and instruction. And it sometimes allows students to participate who potentially in person might struggle with their voice. And so those are just some of the things that what we see in our temporary learning models. The last, within this, really all of these instructional models, we wanted to focus on counseling. Our counseling department at Sutherland has continued to offer all of their services to all of our students in both of the temporary learning models, meaning that fully remote. So I'm gonna come back to this picture in a minute. But this list, so this is a list that back, many, many years ago, before the pandemic, this is what our counseling department typically does for our students at Sutherland. Common App workshop, senior meetings, which is a couple of, or rather the college nights are for seniors. They meet with every senior. They meet with every freshman. They go into health classes and talk about careers and use Naviance. They coordinate the elective area presentations, and then they meet with every single student, 9th through 11th grade, for course selection. Well, our counselors did all that, regardless of the models that the students were in. So the first thing they did, and this was the first time we had students in the building, this is actually our Common App workshop. And it was towards the end of August, and I know, what? Did I get it right? Okay, good. Just give me a shout if I got it wrong.
You're doing great.
I know we'll remember this was the first time that we had students in the building. And I personally will never forget it because it went really well. Everyone was fine. And I thought, oh, we can do this. We're Sutherland, we can do this. So for each of these, with a Common App workshop, meeting with every senior, meeting with every freshman, pushing into the health classes, they took a flexible, determined, creative, compassionate approach to ensuring that every student received these services and these contacts. And in some cases, it became somewhat enhanced because it, in some ways, made it a little easier for parents to participate because they could Zoom. So in terms of the senior meetings and the freshman meetings, so there was actually some potential positives that came out of this. When they met with every student in the building for 9th to 11th course selection, it meant double, right? Because the kids are only in the building, so Monday, Tuesday they would get to them. They didn't want to pull them out of academic, they pulled them out of study halls. And they also coordinated with the fully remote program and pushed into English classes on a set schedule in the fully remote and coordinated with the Mendon High Counseling Office. I feel that counseling, our counseling department, we recognize the essential nature of that department, and they recognize how essential it is to be connected to our students during this time period. And not just for colleges, but that continued connection with their counselor. And Dawn Howe is our department leader, and we've got Colleen Teal, Ben Winter, and Lynn Drake, and they were absolutely relentless in maintaining these services and connections with our students. And we're just very grateful to that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Case, and she's going to continue in kind of the SEL world.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Marin, and good evening. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. And I have the pleasure of discussing instructional SEL. So this is one of the important initiatives that we feel that we needed to really maintain, especially in light of the current environment. We know our students are under an exorbitant amount of stress, and we needed to keep this on the forefront for them and also for our teachers. And so that's sort of the big picture on the why. These are just some positive outcomes that are associated with this SEL work. And with this work, I'm going to specifically talk about instructional SEL. So there's culture and climate, which is more of that community building, promoting, school spirit. And then the instructional SEL actually takes place in the classroom at a tier 1 level. And so that's what we're going to focus on. Another important reason why is the real true partnership between instructional SEL and cultural competency. And so it's a natural association for the two, and these are important district initiatives for us. I really want to highlight within this list the thinking about the validation of perspectives. So through giving students voice, giving students agency, taking the temperature of where students are emotionally, we're really building that cultural competency skill. And we're allowing those students to get to know each other better, but we're not forsaking the academics. So we're doing both at once. We're weaving it into the pedagogy so that we're still keeping that very, very strong for our students. A huge component of this work is high expectations for all students. So even though we know, many of them are coming to us with high levels of stress, it's actually best for them if we keep our eye on the prize and we don't lower the bar, and that we give them the support that they need emotionally to meet their goals. And so that's a lot of what this work entails. And what I like to view it as well is a learning partnership. So it's truly a partnership between teacher and student and the students as a whole in the classroom. So what did we do? We formed this new committee. And so we really found, as I spoke to a little bit earlier, we found the need for this work given our current circumstances, but we always believe in this work. And Sutherland teachers have a long history of engaging in this social emotional work with their students. It might be called something different, and we might be a little bit more explicit about how we're making connections, but we have the skills. And so we made this committee comprised of administrator, myself, some mental health staff, classroom teachers that span a variety of disciplines. And really the charge was to organically develop these goals that we wanted to implement building-wide. So it was really important to not come from a top-down approach, to really say, let's really be a team, and what do we think is important right now during this pandemic when we have all of this to face. And so out of that, 2 distinct charges were born. One is the culture and climate that I referenced earlier, and the other is this instructional SEL. So I'm going to talk about that right now. So the how is really this capacity building, this idea of capacity building within our teams. So we do this in 2 ways. Number one is those monthly meetings. And what we do is we experience the techniques that teachers can use with their students in those meetings with teachers. And so remember, we're representing a large amount of our disciplines in those meetings. And so the goal is for those teachers to be able to translate those authentic learning experiences with their colleagues through informal and formal ways. So through department meetings, but also just through casual conversations and talking about additional ways to connect with students while maintaining rigor, while increasing cognitive engagement. The other way is doing a building-wide professional development. So we've been doing those over Zoom, which is not ideal. However, recently we've started to use breakout rooms and really have some of those interesting and stimulating conversations with our staff around mindset, around equity and cultural competency, in terms of relating to students and making connections with students. And then again, the goal would be to then have the work happen with the teachers in their departments, in the classrooms. So what does it look like? Basically, this is just a sampling, an array of what it looks like at Sutherland. So we can see this anywhere from our music program to English, even the hard sciences. And so I was really proud when I reached out to the staff and asked for examples, and I saw some of these in action. So in music, where our teachers are making explicit connections between mindfulness, gratitude, and then their performance. So they're not just taking time separately to do those like mindfulness activities, they're weaving them in and making the connection for how it impacts performance. Math, an explicit connection between the wheels of logs and then the sources of strength wheel. Literally, they had the 2 side by side and talking about the relationship. So bringing that emotional piece right in together with the academics. Reciprocal teaching in earth science. So we have a teacher using interactive partnerships. So engaged in inquiry tasks and then teaching each other ways to get the students connecting. And then lastly, one of my favorites, using this time period, thinking about the socio-political context of the pandemic and focusing in on that isolation that so many of our students are facing, and then pairing that with themes in novels, and then making associations and allowing those students to write about it and to have a voice and to express themselves. I think I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Puma.
Thank you. Thank you both, and I just take a moment just to thank Summer and Jennifer for just being the greatest teammates I've ever had. They're just phenomenal in the work that we continue to do together. I'm so grateful for all the efforts you make. And we thought we'd close with we talk a lot about what's going on, but this video shows you kind of a glimpse into what the school day kind of looks like. This is the cafeteria and the NPR I mentioned earlier, how our lunch periods are kind of spread out across the building. This is a competitive game of pickleball in PE, and you see how things are going well for that young man. We still see the library being used in the ways that traditionally you see it, a quiet place for study to catch up on some work. This is a health class where students are leading an activity in communication, successful communication. Students in our technology department have used the laser engraver we just recently acquired. This is, I didn't take a video of this class because they were giving presentations and I promised I wouldn't take video. This is a whiteboard in one of our English classrooms where across the top it asks people what they love and just spreading the positive messages from period to period. This is a Spanish classroom where students working in groups and sharing out within the class. This is Casey Stradley in her math class. She found a space outside of the auditorium balcony in the hallway there. It's pretty big where kids can kind of move around and explore the math in groups like that. This is a picture of a more traditional looking classroom. This is a homeroom. This is a link crew lesson on perspective taking the kids were watching during homeroom. Human anatomy class, and this is going to lead into a wind ensemble performance that took place during the school day. One of the assistant principals mentioned it earlier. We did all these planning, and we were expecting the kids to come back, and we were all really concerned for them and just did our best work in preparation for their arrival. And they arrived to this school, and they were looking at us like, what's the big deal? I can wear a mask. I put a cover on my tuba. Let's just do this. And they're just phenomenal. And something that I've shared with the staff all along is that, well, a lot of things look different, but one thing has stayed the same the entire time that we're going through all this, and that's everyone in the school community giving 110% at all times. We're just so proud of all the work that's going on, and it's really nice to share it with you. Thank you. We'll take questions if you have any.
Does anyone have questions?
I was going to ask, and you may have answered before I had the opportunity to ask, but amid the sacrifice, the challenge, the incredible effort from students and families to teachers and staff, somewhere in all of that has to be like a silver lining. So what are the things, what are like your silver lining, but for the pandemic and the challenges and sacrifice we wouldn't have realized? Just curious.
Just a couple come to mind right away, and that's the incredible amount of collaboration that's going on. And we're a very collaborative district as a whole. The pandemic has really forced us to look at things together in a way we never have before, and to a degree that we never have before. So the increased collaboration around the district, within the building and across buildings, it's just been incredible. And it's just because we're surrounded by really, really smart, really caring people who care a lot about kids, and we see that more and more all the time. And the other is just looking carefully at how to maximize our resources. Like I said, we're looking at the building and everything, all the material resources in ways that we never have before. And really maximizing those in ways that we never imagined, never had to think about. So just getting that much more familiar with each other and how we work and how we pull out the strengths of each other, as well as how we really maximize the facilities.
Anyone else?
Amy, can I just have a quick comment?
Yeah.
To answer Pete's question, I think that it goes to a lot of what the community doesn't see that happens behind the scenes, and what some community members do see, but not the vast amount. So in my interactions with Sumra and Jen and Mark, I can give multiple examples of how they've helped and supported children and families through some really difficult times. As I said in the budget presentation with our central office team, with their amount of care and support and compassion, Sutherland's nailed it. The three of you have been amazing with regards to taking care of families and kids. Regardless of any criticism you may hear, there's twofold or more around the lives you've changed and supported during this pandemic. So I just want to thank you all for an extremely extensive amount of work and long hours, and you've done it well. So you've done it better than well. So thank you for all you've done.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here.
Mark, did you want to give us a history of the Sutherland Knights? Or did you want to wait on that? No?
I've made progress. I'm going to hold off until the next time.
So to the community at large, if you know how the Knights started, it would really help Mark Puma, because we're trying to figure out how Sutherland became the Knights.
I have two hours clocked in at the local history department.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, continuing on, I have the pleasure of introducing a guest that we have been anticipating for the past couple of weeks to join us this evening. Ms. Tasha Potter is actually the Boces Director of Diversity and Equity Planning, and she has been working with us for the past 3 weeks or so. And it's my pleasure, Tasha, to welcome you this evening. For those of you in the community, Ms. Tasha Potter.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that warm welcome and the introduction. I am extremely pleased to join you this evening. And what I'd like to do is spend some time sharing with you the work and the collaborative partnership that Boces is engaging in right now with Pittsford. So I'm going to share my screen. And as I do, this gives me an opportunity to highlight some of the ways that I've organized and structured the COSER to be able to support our districts. And so I can just tell you from the first introduction to the follow-up planning meetings that I've had with Superintendent Pirro and members of his team, I have truly been able to see the commitment to equity. And that's really the place that we look at starting. We look for districts to share a public commitment to equity. And when we think about how we can address the needs of equity within any district, we have this view sharing what we call an organizational equity spectrum. And so it's through this spectrum that we can take a look at equity via a strand. We can view it using an equity lens, and we can also think of it being a placement of permeating throughout the system. So it's an organizational focus. And so what I'd like to highlight first is fundamentals for establishing an equitable system. And as I'm going through these strands, what I'd also like to highlight are some connections that have already occurred between my collaboration with Pittsford and Pittsford's team. So the first place that we start is with an equity self-assessment. It's with the self-assessment that we're able to gauge where folks see themselves on an equity continuum. And so questions ask folks to really highlight their understanding and really their placement of whether or not they feel like they've started or begun work in an area to moving on this continuum to feeling like they are truly leading in this area and achieving equity. So some of the places that we can find that are highlighted in this assessment include things like pedagogy, instruction. It includes the relationships that we have with the community. It calls attention to the Board of Education, but most importantly, I think the place that we want to highlight is that of our mission and our vision and what it is that we truly value as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusivity. And then the next placement, which I know that the district has already engaged in many courageous conversations about race, but this is a place where we want folks to be vulnerable. We want folks to really start with this awareness of self, understanding who they are on their equity journey, but more importantly, the journey of the district. Because if you can't find yourself, like if you don't have this self-reflection and this self-exploration, then you're not going to be able to do the work beyond and have that organizational impact. So this is really an opportunity for folks to be able to come together, share their thoughts, their feelings in a vulnerable space, and it gets at the root of understanding how then you can take the very important components of equity and then move those again throughout the system. The other place of work that we really want to make sure that we're rooted in is with our boards of education. We need there to be an awareness with our board. We want the board to understand the very important and necessary work that we're doing. And so this is also a place where we would want to engage in those courageous conversations with the board, but more importantly, having enough information so that it does support the commitments that we make when we talk about our strategic planning process. And again, this is a place where everyone is understanding and speaking the same language around those core beliefs and commitments. I have been invited to participate in the equity policy development. And this has been a great opportunity for me to put my eyes on the policy that has already been created by the district. And so as the district is looking to move this policy forward to the board and to the rest of the community, I was able to share a diverse perspective and again, view it using an equity lens. And I can say that the result of the policy is one that not only the board will be proud of, but the community will be proud of. I think it's very representative of what we look for when we want diversity to be, you know, that statement that we're sharing. And again, it was very, very well and nicely done. So I think that the policy is also another opportunity to say to everyone in the community that this is where we are holding true to, again, that commitment for equity. And then when I think about engaging students and families, this for me is about listening, accessing voice, right? Making sure that our students and our family and our district partners are represented in the very important and necessary decisions that we're making. This is also an opportunity for us to take a look at who's at the table, but it's also us looking to see who's not at the table. So again, that representation, that voice, it matters. And we really want there to be stakeholders that have a diverse perspective as we're looking to ensure that we're leading for equity. And so now I'm going to transition to just that, leading for equity. And this is the development of an infrastructure, right? And then it's taking a look at the data. It's also an opportunity to highlight the ongoing adult learning that needs to occur and we need to make sure is consistently occurring. And so as part of the infrastructure, it's about developing teams within the district, teams that can come together and understand what it is that we need to be doing, having conversations with one another about the professional development opportunities, having conversations about the data, looking at who can we say are our students that are overrepresented in some spaces and who are our students that are underrepresented in some spaces. So those difficult but necessary conversations occur using a leadership team district-wide or a building level leadership team to make sure that we are identifying and more importantly, disrupting the inequities that we see in our schools. And then when I think about auditing our systems, the code of conduct was another place that I was invited to take a look. And so in looking at the district's code of conduct, we wanted to make sure that there wasn't biased and oppressive language embedded. This is another opportunity for us to make sure that we are representing all students. And so I was very pleased that I was asked to put my eyes on the code of conduct and share the feedback, which was welcomed. Another place that we've already started to have some conversations was around curriculum. And so Assistant Superintendent, Ms. Ward, has already started to work and develop a toolkit that will have more of a culturally responsive approach. And it's not just a lesson that's going to be inserted at specific grade levels. There is really more of a comprehensive approach, something that's going to be a part of the curriculum that students K through 12 have access to. So that, again, culturally responsive curriculum is just a part of what all students receive. All students will benefit from that. And so that's been a really nice conversation that we've engaged in, but more importantly, the beginning of the work that I know that there's a commitment to continue. The other place is the transparency of data. And so Superintendent Pirro is very much committed to the idea of diversifying staff. And so when you think about that, we're talking about all leadership positions. And when I think about leadership positions, I think about a teaching position. And so is there an opportunity, is there a pipeline in the district where Black, Indigenous, and people of color can see themselves, growing within the district? And I know that that is one of the district's priorities. So that's a place that we will also continue our work together. And then I think about just the data. What is the data telling us? Are there opportunities for those metrics to demonstrate how not only are we monitoring the progress, but how are we planning for future experiences and opportunities for our students? So that's key. And that's also work that the district has already begun. And I look forward to continuing the review and analysis of data to make sure that we are closing opportunity and achievement gaps. And then last but not least, when you think about how we can make sure that we are growing as a professional community, it's really about putting these conversations in front of us again, where we have multiple opportunities. We have opportunities to unpack, learn, and grow together. And then last but not least, there's been a great deal of work in the district done around restorative practices. That's about school environment and culture. And that's also a place where I look to have further conversations. When I think forward to where we're headed, I know that the superintendent is very interested in us devoting time over the summer months to not only spend together professionally growing and learning, but also to think about that long-range plan. And so the goal is really to make sure that we're addressing things, of course, in the short term, but more importantly, long term. Where do we see ourselves as a district in 3 to 5 years from now? And then even beyond, because we know when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusivity, this work is indefinite. And just making sure that we are being very strategic and thoughtful about the planning to ensure that the district truly is leading for equity. And so one of the other things I'll just highlight quickly is the fact that we have also, this has been one of the most incredible experiences. I had an opportunity to take a look and put my eyes on the district's diversity videos, which have been beautifully done. And I think that just knowing that I can serve as a thought partner and a critical friend as the district is engaging in this very important equity work, I think that this is the type of partnership that we were hoping would come out of the COSER. And this is a fine example of the work and the collaboration that we've been able to share with one another. And so with that, I thank you so much for inviting me to the meeting this evening. And I look forward to many opportunities to be able to share an update here, of course, and of course, my partnership with Superintendent Pirro and his leadership staff.
Tasha, I can't thank you enough for joining us this evening. It's been a pleasure to have you with us and to introduce yourself to our community and to the board table. I know I had the pleasure of meeting you over the phone, but certainly appreciative of your time this evening. But I know Mr. Pirro probably wants to make a comment.
Hey, Tasha. Thank you for the presentation, and I would like to just share again with you and to the community that several of our building and district administrators and teachers have learned from you outside of this role through professional development outside of Pittsford. And when I shared that you would be working with us, they were elated to the point where I got personal texts and emails saying, thank you for bringing Tasha to us. But I think what I'm most excited about is that you're able to take what's in our hearts, in all of our hearts, and help us put that into practice in a way that makes sense for all students and all families. And that's what I'm looking forward to achieving. And I know that we're so fortunate to have you, and thank you for your time tonight. And I look forward to our conversation, I believe, tomorrow morning.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much also for those kind words. And it has been a pleasure to be able to work with your administrative staff. And I see the commitment. I see that folks really, really have nothing but the best intent and interest in your students in the community that you serve and your families. So thank you for allowing me to join you on your journey.
Thank you. Okay, may I have an approval of the minutes from February 8th? So moved. Thanks, Ted. And Irene, any changes? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
So if I could. Tasha, you're welcome to stay, but please don't feel compelled. I'm looking at you right now, and I can see you're still in your office. So go home.
Board of Education reports. Again, my apologies, Deb, for all of the changes that continue. We have confirmation of all the dates that are listed, but don't hold me to them because they could change again. Some are via Zoom, some will be live. The real effort to get back to our socially distanced in-person sessions together became important to the association. So we are aiming for our March meetings to be in person. If that changes, I certainly will let you know. The only exception to that would be the legislative committee meeting, Val, which is going to be via Zoom. And then we do have a conflict with information exchange, Robin, tomorrow because we're having our board retreat. So I apologize for that. That was something that couldn't be changed. So you see all the dates there. They're all listed for now, and they should be updated on the calendar. Deb has been great about updating as we go along. The only thing that I wanted to report on tonight was Community Outreach Advisory Committee, and everyone at the table should have a copy of the talking points that we just created within that committee. And again, for anyone who's listening in the community, COAC is Community Outreach Advisory Council or Committee that is put together by a variety of Monroe County schools that come together and develop talking points that are of interest to all school districts. And as we all know, the hot topic right now is reopening schools fully. And I don't want to confuse that with people saying schools have not been opened. Our schools, thankfully, have been opened. There are some schools in the nation that have not been open. There are some in New York State that have not been open for a year. We have been open, and that's due to advocacy of our superintendents, advocacy of our Board of Educations, and parents and communities, and I can't thank everyone who's been part of that effort. But as a result, recently we sat down and we developed talking points because I think there's a lot of confusion in the public about what's a mandate, what's a regulation, what's a guideline, what do we have to abide by? Well, we're confused too with the ever-changing and evolving mandates and guidelines that were given. So I just wanted to highlight some of these points. And if anyone would like a copy of this that's in the community that's with us tonight, I'm more than happy to share it. But I want to highlight the first statement, which says school districts remain committed to fully reopening schools for all students and staff, and have been actively planning and advocating for regulations that would allow them to fully reopen safely since going remote in March of 2020. Again, we have remained open because of the mitigation efforts that all of our districts have really put into place. Our superintendents have been advocating on a regular basis, and one measure has been when we went into the zoning, you could hear and see all the superintendents say, but we need to test our students, and we're able to do that, and really advocating for that, and that happened, and we were able to remain open. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background on what schools have to do to comply with law and regulations. These executive orders that are listed are all executive orders by the state, by the governor's office. These began as a result of the disaster emergency in New York. The very first executive order here is 202. It was issued on 1/31, and it was in effect until 9/7. Then we have Executive Order 202.45, issued on June 6th, which I'd really like to highlight, where it says, it allowed for schools to open for instruction in September, subject to the adherence to the Department of Health issued guidelines and directives, which were posted and remain on the New York State Department of Health website and have not been modified. They include both mandatory and best practice information. The Monroe County Department of Health provides direct linkage to this document. It should be noted that the Monroe County Department of Health does not recommend the use of barriers as a sufficient alternative to the 6-foot social distancing requirement, nor do they recommend that bandanas are sufficient for masking. While best practice is not the same as mandatory, not following these recommendations could put districts at risk if they choose not to follow them. I want to scroll down, Anthony. I'm sorry, I'm kind of skipping across, but if we could go to 202.68, which was issued on 10/6 and rescinded on January of 2021. This order was the designated red, orange, and yellow zones. So if we just scroll down where it says, through testing protocols, school districts were able to determine that the rates of infection in schools was much lower than the community rate. After the superintendents advocated through the county health department and governor's office, the governor allowed schools to remain open with the color designations with those testing protocols in place. That was a monumental effort to keep our schools open. So thank you, Mike, and other superintendents. That was pretty incredible. Executive Order 202.69, and this was issued on the 14th of October to present. Stated the Director of Budget is authorized to withhold any funds appropriated in the FY20 budget to or for, directly or indirectly, a public, non-public school or school district and/or to a locality for the period of time that such a school district, school, or locality is found to be in violation of Executive Order 202.68. This resolution remains in effect for the entirety of the disaster to allow for penalties for violating the social distancing and masking regulations. We also created a frequently asked questions section, since most districts are being asked very similar questions. I think 1 and 2 are pretty important, where the question is, are all school districts, Boces, required to abide by the governor executive orders? The answer to that is yes. Executive orders are temporary modifications to existing laws that the governor put into place to respond to the disaster emergency. They have the full force of the law, and school board members and school district superintendents must comply. The second question says, do school districts and Boces have to comply with the guidance materials supplied by the federal, New York State, and Monroe County Departments of Health? Yes. The governor's executive orders explicitly define the CDC, the Department of Health, county health departments as the agencies to supply Guidelines for schools. In order to reopen schools for any in-person instruction from pre-K to 12, plans had to be submitted and approved through both the New York State Department of Health and NYSED. Those guidelines have been both mandatory and recommended best practices contained within them, and school districts were required to submit their plans in alignment with this guidance. It also has an explicit note that district superintendents are accountable for staying current with any updates to local, and I just giggle there because staying current is very difficult. Staying current with any updates to local, state, and federal requirements and incorporating those changes into their operations. Guidance and guidelines are not recommendations, but requirements. So we have more information. I won't go through all of it, but it is a three-page document. I think it has valuable information just to be clear about what we do and have to follow at this time. I know that with the introduction of high-risk sports, you know, a lot of people had questions, and I think that's what prompted us to go through some of these executive orders just to outline what we have to do during this time. So if anyone has any questions about this information, I don't know, Mike, if we can put this on the website for people to see.
Nancy, Anthony can forward that to you, or I will forward that to you, and we can put it on the website.
And then, of course, we had the CDC guidelines, and I know you're going to mention that tonight, Mike, but new CDC guidelines that came out as of yesterday. There are some rumblings of more changes to come down the path very soon. We're monitoring that, and I know, Mike, you'll be sharing a lot of that in your report, but I did want to just share what we have been doing in terms of advocating. Dates to remember. The 4th of March, we do have a board tour at Barker Road at 7:30. If I could just have a show of hands of who plans to be there. Okay, perfect. I saw that. Hi. Thank you. Okay, and our next scheduled board meeting is the 9th of March. Financial report. Darren.
Good evening. I have the Treasury report for January 2021. We received our STAR reimbursement for the year of $5.3 million. If you recall, last week, or last time we met, we talked about the governor's proposal, how that would go from being part of the tax levy. He's proposing that would be part of state aid, so we'll keep an eye on that to see where that goes. Looking at on the next couple pages back, looking at the investment schedule, interest rates are very, very low. However, one piece of good news is you'll see on next month's report, we received the 4th quarter sales tax from the county. And 1 year ago, for that same period of time, it was a banner year. I remember saying to you, it was within about $50,000 of what it was last year. So from a sales tax standpoint, the economy is doing well. Food service, same trend, if you will. Basically, we're receiving about 40% of what we normally would with revenue, which makes sense because we have roughly 50% of the students in the buildings on a given day. And we've done a lot of measures to try to trim back costs. We've trimmed back about 40% of our costs. We've done everything from not filling positions to reassigning people to cleaning positions or helping out as aides in the buildings and things of that nature, just to try to trim some of those costs. That's the highlights for the Treasury report.
Thanks, Darren. May I have a motion, please, to approve? Thanks, Val. Pete? Oh. Val, Pete? Questions? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Okay. Next, we have a student that needs transportation to Batavia with special needs. So we did an RFP. We did receive only one bidder. It's a company we've done business with before, Transpo. $25,000 for the remainder of this year, and there's a provision that we can utilize them for next year as well if need be.
Thanks, Darren. May I have a motion, please? Robin and Renee? All in favor? Opposed? Any questions? Okay, motion carried. Thanks, Darren.
Thank you.
Human Resource Report. Welcome this evening, Mr. Clark.
Thank you. Very happy to be with you. Just 2 items for your consideration. First is the professional staff report, and there you will see 3 appointments for paraprofessionals.
Okay. May I have a motion, please? Okay. Pete and Irene, any questions? You have to give Mr. Clark some questions his first night. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you. Second for your consideration is the support staff report, and there you will see an appointment position change from cleaner to maintenance.
May I have a motion? Thanks, Ted. And Renee. Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Curriculum report, Melanie.
Thank you. We actually have 2 items for you tonight, and I have Nicole Berry, Standards Leader for Secondary Social Studies, here with me tonight for both of those. The first is the recommendation for an adoption for a new APUS textbook. And before I turn it over to Nicole to share with you the highlights of the book, which I have put at each of your places, I would just remind you that in, I think, September of 2019, so pre-COVID times, you actually approved a revision to Policy 8340, which has to do with selection of instructional materials. And part of the revisions to that policy had to do with looking at the selection of our materials through a more culturally responsive lens, as well as making sure that they were, of course, high quality, fiscally responsible, aligned with our district mission, vision, and values, et cetera. This is the first formal textbook adoption that we've gone through since the revision to that policy, and probably more significantly, the revision to the regulations that are associated with that policy. The regulations, actually, we were looking at again this morning in a meeting for some fine tuning, but they also now really are very specific and really put the textbook reviewers kind of through their paces relative to looking at any new textbook recommendations through all of the lenses we've always looked at them through, but also through that culturally and linguistically responsive lens. And so there were additional levels of thought, I think, that had to go into selecting this textbook. This past summer, I reached out to Nicole and asked her to take a critical look at the textbooks that are currently in use for all of our U.S. history courses. So our 7th and 8th graders, our Regents U.S. history course, and our AP U.S. history course. And think about those texts through that lens of cultural responsiveness and diverse voices and perspectives being represented. I think my recollection is that the middle school text, Nicole and her middle school teachers felt was still probably the best choice available. The textbook that is currently approved for U.S. history is used more as a supplemental support, and currently there was not anything that jumped out at them as a better alternative. They supplement the current textbook with lots of other resources that round it out. But in the AP US history realm, they dug in and found what I think is a really exceptional and exciting new textbook. So I'm going to turn it over to Nicole to share the highlights of the text and why her team is excited about it. I will tell you that I have spent probably too much time over my cup of yogurt at noon over the last few weeks, paging through the book, struggling to put it aside. I think it's really, it really stands out to me as a very, very high quality, exceptional book that I'm excited to bring to you tonight. So, Nicole?
Hi, everybody. It's good to see you all again. So yes, I'm here to talk about the new Apus textbook, which I'm equally excited about as Melanie is. Like she said, she came to me over the summer and asked my social studies teachers to look at all those various textbooks, and in APUS, we use the textbook. I mean, the students are really expected to read the entire textbook. So we use it a lot. We were not really happy when looking at it through that lens of being culturally responsive, diverse voices and perspectives, just weren't really present in the textbook that we're currently using. And so we definitely wanted to find something better, which this textbook meets that. The other reason why we need a new textbook is that the current textbook is 12 years old, and we've had significant changes to the curriculum and the exam in APUS history. Those happened in 2015. So we've been kind of getting by with what we have for right now and finding some additional sources to help us out. But this textbook will help with that as well. So how does it meet those needs? One of the main goals for this author of this book was to bring different voices from American history into the textbook. Everyday Americans and leaders of all races and ethnicities. And so right off the bat, you know, you're struck with that, and then you get into the book and realize he's done it. Like, that's exactly what he's accomplished his goal. One of my favorite parts of the textbook is the American Voices parts. There are little pieces kind of throughout the textbook. One example is on page 432, where a former slave who has been granted his freedom after the Civil War, his former, the person who owned him before, said that, had asked him to please come and work for him again. Would he please come back and work? And that's his response, is the letter there that you see. It has some humor to it, and so I feel like it's really engaging for the students, as are the majority of the primary sources that they've included that are from people of color and women and other diverse voices. So it's just a really great book in that way. It also addresses the issue of the changes to the curriculum. Every chapter begins with the key concepts and themes that are part of the curriculum. I actually hand that out to my students at the beginning of every unit, so now they can connect that to the chapters that they're reading, which will be very helpful to them. The new curriculum also focuses mostly on skills and the historical thinking skills, and you can see that as well throughout. One of my favorites in the book is historians disagreeing with each other, which is so important to let the students know that we don't all agree with each other. Everybody has some different ideas, and you look at various sources and come up with your own, you know, ideas about history, your own answers to questions. And this book really encourages students to do that, which is what I love about the class I teach. I want them to be historians, and even if it's just for the 40 minutes a day that I have them. You know, not all of them are into doing it all the day, so I guess that's fine. The last part of this is my lab, which I'm super excited about. It's the online component that goes with the book. It is an ebook, and one of the coolest parts about it is you can actually download it on your device, your phone, your iPad, your laptop, and then it's there without Wi-Fi. You have access to it and everything that it offers without Wi-Fi. So especially in a time like this where students have to be online or have to be working from home so much, if they lose Wi-Fi, they would still have access to the book. Within my lab, it has over 700 primary sources. So this is in addition to what's already in the book. The test and the curriculum focuses very heavily on primary sources. So to have access to that many, they also all have an audio component with them, so they can all be read to the students if they need that or if they prefer that. There's also access to a test bank. There's full practice AP exams. I think there's at least 7 of them. They also have videos that were made with the Smithsonian's. Also within the book, you can highlight within the ebook, and there's a notebook section where you can take notes on the parts that you're reading. So like I said, in a class where the students are required to read the book pretty much every night, this will be incredibly helpful to them. And then it's just a great book. So I hope you enjoy looking through it. I don't know, does anybody have any questions? I'm on the fence.
I think one of the things that is intriguing about this book as well, I haven't thought about this a lot. I haven't thought about this much until Nicole brought this book forward. This by a single author, which is very unusual for a textbook. It allows it to read, in my opinion, more like a nonfiction narrative than a textbook. So it's a much more engaging read for our students. And I think that particularly, as Nicole said, since reading the text is such a significant requirement for this course, this really opens up accessibility to the course itself by providing them with a text that is not an easy read, but it is an engaging read. The reading demands for this course are hefty, and they are enough that I personally know of students who have chosen not to take the course, not because they were not capable of the level of work, but because of the demands of the reading and perhaps the dryness of the former text. And this text really pulls you in. So your copies are yours to keep and preview, and then I would ask for action at the next board meeting. So in the meantime, as you're cruising it, if you have any questions, you want to follow them through,
So I do have a question on, does this text allow you to do something additional in the time period after the AP exam until the end of school?
So, no, I wouldn't say that necessarily. I mean, we could certainly come up with additional activities to do, I would say especially through the MyLab component with all of the extra primary sources. That after the AP is always so difficult because you have covered all of history. I mean, we have to cover all of history in order to get to the exam. So it is always a little bit difficult to get into that part. But I would say definitely having access to these extra primary sources would help us to maybe dive a little bit deeper into areas where we were not able to prior to the exam, because you are kind of on a race to get to the end. So, yeah. It does. It is very recent. Yeah, yeah. Which, I mean, and they can put test questions up to today, so you never know what you're going to see on there.
Any questions about that?
I think we should just give what is the return date for our board members, because one of them may tend to hold on to it for a while.
Fabulous. I'm very excited to take a look at it, and I really hope this is something that you all find a great benefit from. But out of curiosity, you were talking about the other grade levels and continuing to look at additional textbooks. Is there any possibility, whether it's from the same publisher, is there something similar for the other grade levels?
Unfortunately, we have not been able to find anything. So we actually spent a lot of the summer creating our own banks of primary sources, which aren't unfortunately as extensive as this is, because we just don't really have the time to put into finding that many, but that's kind of what we're trying to do at this point to supplement the textbooks. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have some hefty reading to do.
Yes.
We can quiz one another.
You'll have a hard time putting it down. You're going to stay up tonight reading that book.
I know.
I can tell.
We have more of a meeting, Pete. We've got to.
The next item in my area on the agenda tonight is to bring you an update on the social studies curriculum in general. And again, Nicole is here to speak directly to this for obvious reasons, not only because she's the standards leader, but she has been intimately involved in this particular project. So I just want to frame this a little bit. This goes back to that letter that all of the superintendents signed last summer, committing to a number of different steps relative to equity work across the region. And specifically, I've highlighted from that letter the bullet in bold here that we would, as a district, partner with Boces and the University of Rochester Center for Urban Education Success to develop common units of study to be included in the curriculum. And so that's exactly what has been happening. The work began in July of this past summer and continues up until present. It is still ongoing work, but it's been, I think, one of the most exciting curriculum projects that we have had the opportunity to be involved in. And so we just wanted to give you some updates tonight, and I'm going to, in a minute, have Nicole share her experience as a writer, but I'm just going to frame it a little bit. So what's being developed by this collaborative group, and the group does include writers from all Monroe County districts, working with folks from Boces, and of note, there are several teachers from the City of Rochester School District as well. So this is not just suburban districts involved, but this is literally all of Monroe County involved in this work. Though they are developing what I refer to as inquiry units. Renee, you'll be very familiar with this work. They are mirroring the work that was done several years ago at the state level when the new social studies frameworks were developed, and the state pulled together teams of teachers from across the state to develop inquiries that were not ever created to be required parts of instruction. And in fact, they're all, if you go into the New York State Social Studies website, you can pull them up as either a PDF or a Word document, because they're meant to be flexible and for teachers to be able to kind of make them their own. Teresa Rotes, who's our elementary social studies standards leader, was involved in that work at the state level when those were being developed. She helped to write some of the inquiries for the K-2 level. So this group has really taken that work and they've mirrored the process and the product, but they've been focused on local history as it relates to race, diversity, and equity. So every inquiry is structured around a compelling question with some supporting questions. They're very focused, again, on having kids interact with primary documents and really developing kids' critical thinking skills. So all of the inquiry work, whether it's these that have been developed locally or the ones that were developed across the state, really are about engaging kids and thinking like historians. They're not about telling kids the story of history. They're about kids uncovering and unpacking and discovering, and then moving on to take action. And so the summative tasks that are part of those units engage kids in taking some kind of informed action, be it in their classroom or in the world at large or anything in between. So the work being done collaboratively in the county right now is focused on developing 2 inquiries for 8th grade use and 2 for 11th grade. We have, these are just the titles of the units as they stand right now. And under each title is the compelling question that's driving the unit. I actually had to edit this a couple days ago because these keep morphing a little bit. Every time the group writes, they make adjustments and they make improvements. And so things are still in draft form, which is important to understand. But the idea here is to engage our 8th graders and our 11th graders in very local history related to race, equity, and diversity in the Monroe County area. So you can see the focus is on events that have taken place locally from 1964 forward. And I'm going to let Nicole talk about her experience a little bit as a writer in this project.
So I'm equally excited to talk to you about this. When Melanie came to me over the summer and asked if I'd be willing to take part in this project, I was like, absolutely yes, I'm in, sign me up. And it has absolutely lived up to my expectations of what it would be. And so while the work has been intense, both as a time commitment and within the content itself, it's been absolutely worth it. I can't say enough about it. Like Melanie said, we've been meeting since July. We met 4 times over the summer. Since school started, we've met twice a month. And one of those days each month is a full day, 8 to 3. The other day is usually 1 to 2 hours just within our inquiry groups. Over the summer, we spent most of our time focused on learning the local history that we would need in order to write these inquiries and really diving into the primary sources that were available. And I can't, there's so many, like you can't even go into them, and I want to show all of them to my students. And there's just not time, which is really disappointing. So maybe we could extend the school year, and I'm sure people would be happy to do that. So we went through the sources. We also had Justin Murphy come in and give us a presentation. He's a reporter with the Democrat and Chronicle and has actually done a lot of work around this already. And so he, shared what he's learned with us. At that point, we chose a topic and started working on the inquiry. So like Melanie said, the purpose of the inquiry is for students to actually do the thinking. They look at the primary sources and they make their own decisions. They answer the questions for themselves. And so I'm going to show you what the inquiry looks like at this point. Like Melanie said, it's still in draft form. So, and it changes pretty frequently. There are 6 of us that are working on this Google Doc at this point. So, I mean, it could have changed since the last time I had it open today. Wait, did I just do something wrong? What did I hit? Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, so you can see it starts with the compelling question, what is the promise of education in Rochester? And you can see on the side, it's 46 pages long. I'm not going to show you all 46 pages, but it's pretty lengthy. However, especially as a veteran teacher, if you want to get into this inquiry, you could really look at the first few pages and have a very good idea of what you're going to be doing, have access to the sources right there, what the activities are around those sources, and be in a pretty good spot without having to go into everything else. For newer teachers who might need a little bit more help getting through it, it gives a lot of information to really get them through the entire inquiry. So we start off with the New York State Court of Appeals made a decision in 2003 about where they defined what a sound basic education is, and we asked the students to think about that and give them some information around that decision. What is a sound basic education? And then, I'll just kind of as a side note, when we decided what we wanted to work on within my group, segregation in the schools really stood out to me as something that was interesting to talk about with the students, because I think typically when we talk about segregation, we're usually talking about segregation in the South. Especially in U.S. history, that's where the focus is, and you're racing to get to the end of the year, and that's what you really talk about. But that's not the only place segregation existed. It existed everywhere. So it's really important to get that across to the students. And so the supporting questions, ask the students to think about that. We start at the beginning, sort of what was there segregation in the Rochester City Schools in the early 1960s, really right after Board of Ed is what we're looking at. And you can see this is the kind of the meat of the inquiry. There we go. And so all of the items in red are the actual protocols, the activities that the students would take part in. And then at the bottom, we have the sources. And so these are the featured sources. This was the hardest part, just whittling down what the sources would be. I thought it would be interesting for you to see a couple of the different sources that we're working with. So here is a Rochester City School District map from 1962 and 1963. And it's the percentage of non-white students enrolled in the elementary districts. And so I thought that would be, as a group, we felt like that'd be really interesting for the students to see that non-white students were really focused in on really specific areas. It's not throughout the district. And at this time, there weren't really suburban districts yet. I mean, we're getting to that point, but not quite yet. There's still a lot of people living strictly in the city. And then, the redlining map of Rochester. We talk about redlining on a national level in our district, but how interesting is it for the students and how engaging is it for them to actually see, here's the redlining map in Rochester. They were doing this here. It wasn't, it was happening here. And so it's important for you to know that and understand the impact that then had on education and on schooling for students. So those are a couple of the documents that I found really, really interesting. So they go through the 3 different inquiries. These will probably take about a day apiece. And then we go on to the next page, which is where we have that taking action part that Melanie was talking about. What we're really hoping the students are going to be able to do is come up with their own solution to segregation in schools. And what would that solution look like? And then our pie in the sky dream sort of idea is that the students would then report it in a sort of science fair situation, and we would bring in the Board of Education and the superintendent and maybe even some people from the New York State Education Department to hear what the students had to say. I mean, that really makes it authentic for them. They're reporting their findings and their information and how they think what their solution might be to these people that can actually make changes and can actually, put their plans into action. So, yeah, I mean, again, it's been a great process. The last little piece was just, I don't have it back up there, was that working with other teachers throughout the county has also been pretty amazing. I'm somebody who always loves to work with other teachers and see what they have to say and what they're working on and learning from them, and that's exactly what's happened. Just being in this group with these 6 other teachers, I've taken home a slew of activities to do with my students that are some of them around this topic and some of them on completely different topics. So it's been great. I don't know, any questions? Yep.
So, again, these are still in draft form. I think maybe, Nicole, your inquiry is the farthest along of the four, perhaps? They're close.
I don't have a lot of information.
Yeah. Of course it is. It's all that enthusiasm. So this is just a quick timeline of what's sort of to come with this particular project. The inquiries in March will go out for review by some local historians and scholars. They'll be sent to the ASI group to take a look at. We'll all be able to give feedback back to the writers. They'll go back. They'll make any recommended adjustments as they see fit, although you can see the work is so thorough that I don't anticipate there'll be significant changes at that point. On April 7th, they will be running a full-day professional learning experience for any teachers who will be piloting these inquiries this spring. So every writer is asked to attend, because every writer is asked to pilot in their own class if they teach an appropriate class. 8th grade or 11th grade U.S. history. And then they are, initially we thought it was that Nicole would be invited to bring one friend to the training, but suddenly it became opened up. And so she's invited to bring any other 11th or 8th grade social studies teachers from the district to the training, partly because the training will be virtual, and so that always allows you a bigger audience. So I think we have several of our middle school and high school teachers that will be trained this spring. Some of them hopefully will pilot one or both of the inquiries appropriate for their grade level this spring. This summer, then there will be another full round of training for any additional 8th or 11th grade social studies teachers who didn't go through the pilot training, with the intention being that during next school year, all 8th graders and 11th graders across the county will experience these inquiries as part of their regular 8th and 11th grade U.S. history instruction. So that's pretty exciting, and we just don't write curriculum this way in this county. To have something that is common across the county is very unusual. In the future, what they've shared with us at our last ASI meeting is that the group is looking to potentially branch off into another content area next year and do another experience of developing collaborative inquiries for around social justice. Perhaps in science was the content area that was pitched to us initially, but they're also open to looking at other content areas as well. And I know there's also been some talk about continuing the work in social studies with something for other grade levels. And then internally, we know we also have work to do looking K-12 at how we are making sure that we're spiraling throughout our experience for kids, these opportunities to develop critical thinking in the area of diversity, equity, civic mindedness, and social justice. So there's both external and internal work to come. So with that, I will see if you have any questions for either Nicole or myself.
I have a quick question. Very much enthused by the work that you're doing. It's fantastic. And I may have missed it in Tasha's presentation earlier, but is her lens woven into this work in some way?
Has Tasha been at your work at all? I know her lens is definitely there because she's connected with many of the leads that are kind of overseeing the program. Tasha also now attends the ASI meetings with us every month, and we get the report from the lead facilitator of this group there. So her eyes are on it. I don't know that she's been directly involved in the work right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. But you can see how all these pieces come together tonight. Yeah. This was planful.
Any other questions?
I just have a comment. I think the work is brilliant. I've seen it from the start to where it is now, and I think about being an 8th grade student or a high school student, and how much more relevant this learning is, and for me to make connections because it's local and to understand the local history around all of these topics is fascinating. And I think that that's going to serve as a huge hook for many of our students. And when you look at the primary sources, it just adds that much more authenticity to it. It's like it comes to life for you. I think the timing couldn't be better. I think that the prompts have been spectacular, and I love the notion of bringing in a combination of our students understanding and learning more about citizenship and advocacy now after learning about the past.
Yeah.
Remarkable work, Nicole and Melanie. Thank you for all of this. I'm so excited for the pilot.
It's really exciting.
It's outstanding,
it's
actually.
Exciting work.
Yeah.
And I can't let Nicole go without thanking her publicly for what she's invested in this year. This is not a year where we have asked teachers to take on anything additional. This has been a significant additional undertaking on her part, and she's done every bit of it cheerfully, willingly, with great enthusiasm. But, you know, when other teachers are collaborating with their colleagues on a Wednesday afternoon about the lessons they're going to teach in their class next week, she's doing this work with Boces and the folks from the U of R. So this has pulled her away from her primary role as a teacher of U.S. history at Pittsford Mendon High School right now. But I'm so blessed that we've had her talent and enthusiasm at the table representing Pittsford. So thank you.
Love it. Nice job,
And we
Nicole.
thank you too, Nicole. Thank you so much. Okay, special education report. Elizabeth.
We have CSE and CPSE recommendations on the consent agenda.
Thank you. Superintendent's report. Mike.
There's not a need for an executive session this evening. Just want to introduce or reintroduce the concept of budget guidelines to the community more so than to the Board of Education. So we have our district planning team that comes together multiple times throughout the budget season and goes through multiple revisions relative to how to recommend priorities in the budget to the Board of Education. Tonight, the Board of Education has our 25th draft that we're putting in front of you for consideration. But what's different this year is the fact that we're trying to establish a budget based on the notion that we're coming off of a pandemic. So a few things to note that are in the budget guidelines. As we looked at developing a budget for next year, one of the things that we felt was critical was to not exceed the tax cap. And we also are planning our budget with the notion of opening schools fully without temporary learning models, as long as that's permitted by the New York State Department of Health. So as we build our budget and present our budget, it's based on students K through 12 coming in fully 5 days a week. Some other areas I do want to read the bullets under the first category, which is developing a student-based budget that recognizes and responds to the changing needs resulting from the pandemic by focusing on these big ticket items. The first is equity and inclusion for all. We started this work in a big way a couple years ago. And as you saw on a couple slides, some of our work had to be postponed, this being one of them. And as we bring people together after being isolated for so long, that concept of inclusion is so important for us. We are going to need additional social emotional learning and mental health supports going into next year. We believe that we have the data to support that. We'll talk more about specifically what that will look like as it pertains to the budget in our next meeting. We can't lose sight of what safe facilities mean in a safe environment. We had to stop the work, if you recall, before the pandemic. We're coming off the heels of active shooters and all those horrible things. So we need to reactivate a lot of the training that's necessary, including things like our emergency response buttons, our full blown drills, retraining staff, etc. We also recognize that our students are going to come back to us with a wide range of academic needs. And by that, we're not just talking about the students that are struggling with content, but also the students that weren't challenged as much this year. And so thinking about bringing back the supports and what that would look like for Project Challenge, what that would look like for math support, ELA support, etc. One of the things that has certainly shined through our presentations has been that notion of how well we've done relative to collaborating with one another, specific to curriculum, and finding ways to use resources and time to allow that collaboration to continue through PLC work. We also recognize that we took for granted the role of technology in our schools. We had technology carts, we had technology when needed, but the reliance on technology and understanding the power behind using it well has been incredible. So maintaining and growing the hardware, software, and resources for technology is going to be important. We also recognize that you can't just turn off or turn on a switch to bring things back to normal. And there needs to be resources allocated to bringing us back together as a community. And just a quick example of that, we have our middle school and high school students, for example, that are remote and hybrid, and not all of them are doing great, and they have fallen into, you know, their own ruts, if you will. And so thinking about things like how do we do orientations, how we're doing our web and link crew. It's almost like we need to bring those back on steroids and look at additional resources to train students to be leaders and support one another and support the school community. I also think that we don't have necessarily just a 6-7 transition and an 8-9 transition and a kindergarten transition. We need to figure out how to transition everyone back. Even if we're back open this year, we still have a good amount of students that are remote learning that we would be bringing back the following year. So we look at this as a pretty pertinent item. And then we also have smaller class sizes when possible. And that's on here as a budget guideline because we discussed what worked well during the pandemic, but we also understand the year that we're working into or moving into, where the budget's going to be very difficult. But I feel that if there's an opportunity in different areas to maintain programs that maybe we would cut in normal years because of participation, that we allow a smaller group to come in. For example, a lot of our music classes didn't have the opportunity to participate this year and or recruit to get students interested. And if in a normal year we needed 15 students to open a class and this year we had 8, I would ask for 8 to be acceptable so we can regrow those types of classes. So that's kind of a highlight. We've always operated on a budget that supports our students the best way possible, and those are the big ticket items as we look at building our budget for next year. Other areas that we think are going to be important as far as balancing the community's investment in education with sensitivity to limited revenues would be leveraging technology more. So taking a look at field trips and looking at technology to look at virtual field trips, looking at technology more for meetings, travel and conference. So maybe we're not going out of state for different conferences or other places. We're able to leverage technology for that. And also seeing more opportunities to work with colleges and access students to help offset maybe the cost of tutoring or assistance with closing students' learning gaps, and again, on both ends. If it's students that were needing remediation or students that weren't challenged. So trying to be creative in that venue. So this is where our district planning team landed, and at our next board meeting, I will ask you for approval. And so between now and our next board meeting, if you have feedback to the district planning team, then we will make amendments to the budget guidelines between now and then, so that it can be presented to you at our next board meeting.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, moving on. Dr. Von Brogan, if you would be so kind as just, I believe the last board meeting I shared with the community that we would give an update on our equity policy. If you could just share, maybe you can come over here, Pat. If you could just share, oh, that's perfect. Where we are relative to the equity policy.
Thank you. I'd be very happy to. We had an outstanding committee working on this policy. We had students, teachers, administrators, and parents. And we did a lot of work to really understand, first of all, what is policy, so that we were looking at this through the larger lens of a document that would guide our actions. And we also did research into other districts around the country and what they were doing in terms of equity policies, because there really were not a lot in this particular area, and I think that was what Tasha indicated as well. So as we process this through, we've come up with a draft, and so far that draft has been shared with the central office team, the PDLT, and specifically with principals and assistant principals, asking them to gain additional student voice through their various clubs, diversity clubs, GSA clubs, Rock to Change, councils, etc. there, so that we're producing a document also that the students will understand is going to guide our actions. Tasha, as she mentioned, has reviewed that and given us some feedback on the document. We've shared it with the district planning team on February 11th, receiving feedback from them. And tomorrow night, it will be shared with the Inclusivity Advisory Council. So after all of those come back in, we'll look at what types of changes need to be made, and then our goal is hopefully in March to get it before the Board of Education for the first reading. Okay. Does anybody have questions on that?
I would just say collaboration takes a long time.
It does.
And this certainly has been that process.
Yes, it has.
So thanks for all your patience and work
Yeah.
with it, Pat.
And the little pause of that pandemic.
Thanks, Pat. And then last, if I could just share, I don't know where to start. I'll start by just thanking staff and our administrators, as we've been so worried about having to close schools for things that I think a lot of people don't have to think about. We've gone through about 50% of our staff have been vaccinated. So every time you have a cohort getting vaccinated, you worry about side effects and are they going to need a sub the next day. We had one day where we had, I think, 24 Minden Center staff getting a vaccination on a Thursday. I think it was their second shot. And then worried about finding subs on the Friday. We worked on contingency plans across the district so we wouldn't have to close down. Then we worried about February break and travel and thinking about, are we going to have to close down after that because of the quarantine rules? And we've stayed open, and it's our staff have been troopers. They've been amazing. I've shared this before. We have more memorandums than ever in history of memorandum existence. because our staff want to do what's best for students in our community. And it's almost like we've set our contract aside. And so when we hear about unions in a negative light, I can't comprehend that here in Pittsford, because it's been unions in a positive light, not only in how we've been able to open school, but in sacrifices in people's personal lives to allow us to stay open. So I guess I'll start with a thank you to our staff for that. And then to the community, I guess I would extend another thank you to you as well for how you're hanging in there, and for all of your advocacy on behalf of the district to support our plight to reopen schools fully in a safe manner. You've been amazing as well. So there's no better place than being here. There's a few things that I'd like to try my best to clarify. I feel that there's been a lot of questions about whose job is it, or whose authority is it to open schools, and it's been complicated. I think there's been a lot of finger pointing. There seems to be a lot of this organization says this, and this organization says this, and schools should make the decision to open, or schools can make the decision to open. So I'll do my best to try to articulate this. We have CDC that is at the federal level. So the CDC creates guidelines for reopening schools safely. And from that point, it seems that that's the overarching umbrella of guidance for all of our states. And then it's up to the states to decide if they are going to adhere to the CDC guidelines to the letter, or if they're going to make edits. So, for example, there's some states that I can think of, especially down south, that have state guidelines that are totally different than CDC. And so they have their own set of state guidelines. And then we have the New York State Department of Health, that just like those other states, that have discrepancies from CDC. So, for example, the CDC will say you need to put all of your efforts into getting students back to school in academics before considering extracurriculars and sports. Well, in New York, we have high-risk sports playing right now, and we're still not back to school fully. So that's an example of a variance between New York State Department of Health and what the CDC is saying. The commonality between CDC and New York State Department of Health are more than the discrepancies. The biggest commonality between the two are 6 feet, the social distancing, and the masking. In the new CDC guidance, it explicitly, I think I read 25 times, it mentioned 6 feet. Don't quote me on that. It was a lot. I think it was over 20. But it kept referencing 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet. The Department of Health mentions 6 feet, but they also provide this caveat for barriers with a mask. So that's a little bit of a variance as well. And then you have another organization, the State Ed Department. The State Ed Department created guidance to districts based on the New York State Department of Health, whereby we had to submit plans to the New York State Department of Health and New York State Department of Education, both to be approved in order to start school this year. Then you have Monroe County Health Department, who has provided guidance on best practice and advice around interpreting guidance and how to implement best and the safest, most safe practices. And then you have the governor's office, who has been responsible for writing several different executive orders, and he's also certainly a player in this. So, and then you have the school district and you have the school board. And so when people say that this is a local decision, so which the governor did. So the governor did say this is a local decision for school districts to reopen. And I think this is an important part to the conversation. When he said that, he's kind of right. It is a local decision to reopen. There's a comma there, because the second part of the sentence is, as long as you can adhere to the Department of Health recommendations. So we can make a choice to build 6 more schools and be able to space everyone out 6 feet, and then it's our choice. So I guess by the if you took it literally, he's accurate. But it's confusing because when the governor says it's a local choice, I think people feel that it's okay, school districts can decide to open. But we can't, if we wanted to open tomorrow, if we said, you know what, we're done with this, we're going to open tomorrow, and we're going to have everyone come in, because the governor said it's a local choice, it wouldn't last long. Because we answer to the New York State Department of Education, the New York State Department of Health, both which would have us shut down in a heartbeat. It's a tough thing, I think, for the community to grasp, because it's a tough thing for all of us to grasp how many different pieces of guidance and how it's evolving on a regular basis is happening. And I'll also share that last year, if you recall, and you probably wouldn't unless you had a senior, but last year, and this might help clarify like some of the roles for decision makers. We had worked with Monroe County Department of Health and Executive Bello on graduation plans for our seniors. And we were adamant about having the students out so long that we wanted to bring them together as a class. And we felt that if we had that experience in a safe way, that it would get approved. So we asked for approval to have our seniors graduate at Frontier Field. They would be 6 feet distanced outside. We got the thumbs up from Monroe County Department of Health. We got the thumbs up from Executive Bello. And we were excited. We started sharing out with families, and then Governor Cuomo shared with us that we could not do it. And so that kind of helps you maybe understand who are the decision makers. And so it's complicated because it sounds like there's a lot of them. And so I feel like as we think about our schools reopening, we have to think about what has to happen in order for the CDC, New York State Department of Health, the governor's office, and SED to be relatively on the same page. So having said that, I am fairly confident that there are multiple conversations that are happening so that organizations can get on a better page, the decision makers can. I do feel that with the CDC guidance, while it doesn't sound hopeful to have a return this year, I beg to differ. I do think that there is an opportunity that lies within that document. It's the first document that we've seen that almost responds to our request for metrics to come back to school fully. So if you've seen the document, it does have different zones listed on it, and it has different parameters of what districts can do depending on which zone you're in. The worst zone to be in is the red zone, and that's what we're in right now. The red zone says that we must be 6 feet and masked. No exceptions. But in order to get to the best zone, which is the blue zone, or even the second best zone, which is the yellow zone, it's not that far away. And what the metrics that they're using is based on the new cases per 100,000 people within a 7-day rolling average. So you'll see that on the Monroe County website, where we are accustomed to seeing what that 7-day rolling average is. That's what's being used now to put us in a zone category. Today or yesterday, we were at 142 was our rolling average. In order for us to get out of that zone and get to that low to moderate risk zone, we need to go from 142 to about 50 cases per day. And a lot of projections say that that will be between 4 and 6 weeks away in order for us to get there, because our numbers seem to be dropping exponentially with the level of vaccinations that are happening, and holidays being over, and people doing the right thing. So once our numbers get to that level, according to the CDC document, we have more options. And what we're anticipating is that in the next 2 to 3 days, that the CDC will be revisiting what those options are and better defining social distancing or not. But if we get to 50 cases a day, from my review along with others, including health officials, it allows that door to be open for us to begin thinking about how to bring students back full time. And so our numbers are looking good. We're heading in the right direction. Our staff are getting vaccinated. We just need that green light for the right department to give us the metrics to open. And I think we're getting close, because I do believe that those organizations that I mentioned are coordinating better now, and it's taken a while, but they're doing it. I also want to make a note that my comments about Governor Cuomo were not meant to be anything other than factual. I think it's important for the community to hear what we contend with, and that's what happened last year relative to graduation. So I'll pause for now and just see if the board has any questions with that report. So then I'll continue. As far as reopening things, we are planning to have graduation as planned on the calendar for our seniors. We are currently planning on having a 10 o'clock graduation and a 2 o'clock graduation like we have every year. We're planning on having the entire class celebrate together along with guests. We are working on logistics, so there may be a limitation to the amount of guests. But Mendon High School will have it on their turf stadium with most likely guests on the bleachers. And Sutherland will similarly have it on their turf stadium with guests on their bleachers. Both graduations will be live streamed. And so we're moving forward with graduation plans. We are meeting regularly now to talk about additional things for our seniors. Our senior ball, for example, is definitely not off the list of things to do. So we are looking at ways possibly to have a senior ball outside. We're looking at senior awards possibly, again, as a large cohort outside. And we are in talks right now about another senior parade for May or June. So we do want to acknowledge the hardship that our seniors have had, especially all that they missed as juniors from March on, and then not to be back in school. So we want to do everything that we can. We've been planning for every scenario, and so when when people email or call and ask, what are you doing to reopen? I'm not sure how to respond because we're doing a lot of planning in a lot of different facets. So if there's a decision that allows us to reopen, it won't take us a month to do that because we're planning on different scenarios. So for example, right now we're planning on what would it look like if the CDC or DOH changed from 6 feet to 3 feet. What would that? How would we deal with that? What would we need to do to make that happen? What happens if we move to that 50 rolling average and maybe social distancing is out the door and just masks? What does that look like for us? So we're looking at all the different scenarios that's going to take us to open. We've looked at the scenarios that it's going to take for us to close. We've advocated for metrics to reopen. We meet regularly. We meet nonstop. So I would just want the community to know that there's really no stone left unturned. We're couldn't be prouder of the people I work with. Couldn't be prouder of our community for your advocacy. And this is fluid, but I would not discount at all shutting the door on reopening this year. So we're moving forward with the planning on what it would look like for us, and we'll see what the Department of Health at the state level and or the governor with executive orders and or the CDC says to open that door for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Thanks, Renee and Val. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Old business. New business? Anyone?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak for just a couple of minutes. This has been a great 4 years of being a part of the Pittsford Board of Education. I've thoroughly enjoyed working with all of you, and I really very much enjoy working for our community and being a representative here to all of them. So after a lot of thought and a lot of discussion at home with my family, I am excited to announce that I do plan on run for a re-election for another 3 years. I'm really looking forward and fingers crossed that I get to work with all of you guys again. It's been a great experience. I've learned so much from all of you. I'm so proud of the work that we've done and hopefully continue to do as a group. And here's to another 3 years, hopefully, fingers crossed. So thank you.
Yay! Thanks for sharing. Thank you for sharing that message. And Renee, we feel the same way, right back at you. So thank you for sharing that. Anyone else?
Okay, that's going to be hard to follow. After a lot of thought, I have made the decision not to seek re-election. And I must say, after hearing all of our presenters tonight, this is a very hard statement to make. Now that I'm hearing about all the wonderful things, I mean, I know anyway about the things great things have been going on, but certainly what's happening in the future as well. So, but I will say I agree with Renee. I have truly enjoyed working with so many very talented and extremely devoted teachers, staff, administrators, and of course my fellow board members as well. And I'm definitely looking forward to serving out the rest of my tenure as a board member, and I'm hoping, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that I'll get to see one of those inquiry projects in action. So, thank you.
Well, that's with sadness that we see a board member, you look around this table and you see board members and you really value who you work with as a team and you build those relationships, but someone who has served as our legislative liaison in such a professional fashion, somebody who is recognized not only in our own at our own board table, but with Monroe County School Boards as a leader, someone who has led the charge of the legislative arm. You're someone who's kept us educated on a regular basis with what's going on in Albany. You've taken trips on a bus and been stuck underneath a bridge. You've really taken on, you talk about people who have really dedicated and taken their job seriously as a board member. And what I have to say to you, Val, is you've been a very valued member of our team, and this is very much a team. And I often say, you know, the team is only as strong as the people that you sit at the table with, and so we are going to miss you.
Well, I'm going to split the difference here, I guess. I break the tie. So after much thought and a lot of years on the board, so I've been on the board since 2009, and before that, I actually, really 20 years I've been involved in this, and it's been interesting, Melanie, when you were talking about how the online professional learning was well received, and it was interesting to think about when we were turning the century. We were doing a lot of futuring and thinking what the future was going to look like, and the future was going to be online learning, and we broke up into groups and talked about, oh my gosh, how could this even be possible? And here it is, I'm here 20 years later, and it's possible. Anyway, so I started on the board in 2009, and the year I was elected, the current seniors were finishing kindergarten. So I think it is just appropriate for me to finish this year with the current seniors. So I've seen the entire 12 years of schooling as a board member. Wow. I've been loving working with this. I'm not leaving because I don't love all this, and I'm not leaving because I'm still passionate about it. But the reason I think it's time to go is there are a lot of other people who should have this opportunity, and that's why I'm leaving.
That brings tears to my eyes because you think about that. And, you know, I didn't even think about it in relative terms, in terms of watching the senior class graduate and the meaning behind that. But Irene, you've put so much time and effort into the district beyond just being a board member. But again, your critical eye and the way that you can look at data is unlike anyone I've ever seen. You're such a valued member as well. And I clearly did not know this leading into this meeting, but I have to tell you that it's with great emotion that we have to say goodbye to you as a trusted and one of the most senior members at the table. So I just have to say thank you for your service. 12 years and your family. You're now a grandparent. You can be with your grandchildren, but what you have contributed to our district is beyond measure. So I thank you on behalf of, I'm sure, all of us at the table.
I'm keeping this book. I'm keeping the book.
And that's your gift. I'll give you my book too. If you yes, you may.
So this is like reality TV, I think, and that I had no idea that Irene was not going to come back until just now. And so I'm just a little bit numb by that announcement. And I would say that you know, while you can say K through 12, you've been in the district. I've known you all of those years, and there isn't anyone that's more ethical and more student-centered and wanting to listen to the community's voice. And you've been an extraordinary board member, but you've also been a tremendous person and friend to work with and colleague to have conversations with. So again, I wasn't prepared to hear this. So if you want to change your mind before next meeting, you can, of course. But I just wanted to say publicly that I really, how much I value you and thank you for all of your years of service.
Thank you. That's so kind. I might change my mind. This is so lovely.
And we'll have plenty of opportunities, hopefully, in the near future, to celebrate in a socially distanced, proper way. But
Unless CDC changes the.
Well, and you know, according to New York State, we could do it at a billiards room. That came out today, I'm just saying. I know that, but it's in these documents from New York State. So, wow, it's a lot of information. All right, so moving right along. Public comment. There's no other new business. Please, no one else has anything else to say? Okay. All right, moving on to public comment. So I will just reiterate what the rules of engagement are so that everyone's aware. We are on a tight schedule tonight. We're way beyond. So we are going to limit all the comments to 3 minutes. When you do get on, if you could please state your name and your address clearly so that Deb can capture that. And if you could stay on after your comment so that if there is a response to it, we're able to do it before you log off. With that, okay. Nicole, you're on mute. I don't know if that's on your end or ours. We can't hear you still. No, we still can't hear.
Our screen shows that you're on mute, Nicole. I am very good at reading lips, though.
I'm impressed by that.
Thank you, Mr. Piro.
Unmute.
There you go.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Oh, wait, I just disappeared again. Hold on.
Nope, we see you.
You see me?
Yes, and
All
we
right.
can.
I can't really see myself, and I'm not sure why that is.
Okay. Well,
anyway, oh, there I am again. Okay, listen. Thank you everyone for your hard work. Okay, so I'm going to say some critical things, but first of all, thank you because I really do appreciate it. Okay,
Nicole, before you begin, can you just give us your address?
Yes, my address is 39 McCord Woods Drive.
Okay, thank you.
Fairport, New York.
Thank you.
I'm in that weird part of Fairport that goes to Pittsford school. So I have three kids in the schools.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I got skin in the game. Okay, and my concern is this. Okay, that I'm hearing a lot of confusion about opening schools, not only out in the community, but from this board. Okay, and that is really concerning to me. So, number one, Dr. Mendoza. Okay, I just got an email from my county legislator, John Baines, who told me, and you probably know that Dr. Mendoza was at a hearing, was called to a hearing in front of the county legislature last night, okay? And this is what County Legislator Baines says to me. The key takeaway from last night's meeting is the clarification that Dr. Mendoza, the chair, that's our county health director, has no jurisdiction or authority to dictate school policy. None. Okay, elected school boards and their appointed school superintendent in compliance with directives from New York State determine the delivery of instruction to students. So Mendoza is out. So whatever Mendoza has said, whatever the Monroe County Board of Health, they themselves have said, and it's not just last night, but in letters in response to inquiries, that they have nothing to do with it. It's between the board and the state. Now I know that Rockville Center Schools in Long Island just announced that they are opening fully. Okay, they've already been open in elementary. They are opening fully to middle and high school students. They're phasing them in March. They're using barriers as per the state directives. The state directives always have, since August, allowed for the use of barriers, okay, instead of the 6-foot distance. And this is what Rockville Center School District is doing. They are opening in March. And my question to you as the board is why is there not a plan like this that you are putting forward? Why are you not phasing students in March? Now, As for the CDC recommendations, the CDC has no authority over the state. You know, they don't. They're a federal body, okay? Because if they did have authority, then you all would be shutting sports down immediately, because their red zone directive for the red zone, of which we are in, as you note, is that no sports, no extracurriculars whatsoever are allowed. And as we have seen in this state, we have not only okayed sports, we have okayed high contact. Wrestling and hockey, okay, is going on as we speak. And the idea that this is somehow easier to control in terms of infection is just pure nonsense, because it's not only high school hockey that's going on, it's junior hockey all over the place. Youth hockey, okay?
Nicole.
It's happening now all over the place, okay? So that's number one, that the CDC does not have authority here.
Okay, Nicole.
If you did, you would be banning high school sports.
Nicole, so what is your question?
My question to you is, why are you, first I have two questions. Why does the board not have accurate information? Why is the board citing bodies as authorities over its actions that do not have authority over its actions, that have proven not to have authority over its actions? That's my first question. And my second question is, why is the board not moving forward with a proposal to fully open the school according to the state guidelines that have been given, particularly when our own governor has been publicly calling for the return of full-time in-person school? The board has its directives in front of it. The state has the guidelines. You know what those are. You can do it. Why are you not doing it?
I think this is a combination of what Superintendent Pirro actually already responded to in his report tonight, but we are taking directives from the state, from the federal, from the local guidance. And I've said this over and over again, we do take an oath of office. We have to abide by the guided mandates throughout this pandemic. This is something that we don't.
But then you tell me then, why is it that a school in this state, Rockville Center Schools, has announced that they are returning middle and high school students to full-time in-person instruction 5 days a week, complying with the state guidelines? Why is it that they have done that and you cannot?
Well, I can't compare another school district to ours, especially in a county that I'm not familiar with.
They are in the state. They are in the state of New York.
I understand that.
They are bound by the same as you, and your own Monroe County Director of Health has said he has nothing to do with it. So it's between you and the state. It's between Roxville and the state. You both are in the same state. There's no difference. Why? Why are you not doing what Roxville is doing?
There is a difference between schools. And so I don't know the size of the school. I have no idea what their facilities look like. And as Mr. Pirro actually pointed out earlier, you know, if we could build 6 new school buildings, we'd be able to adapt to the guidelines that are in place. So
no, you are not listening to me.
Okay,
you
no, I am, Nicole. I am listening,
you
and I
do it with barriers.
Okay,
you're not listening, and you're actually delivering inaccurate information.
I'm not.
So
I'm
that
not.
is a real problem to parents.
Okay.
Parents have felt ping-ponged around and just given answers that are not actually accurate, and we want better answers from our board.
Okay, Nicole.
Can I just really quick?
Sure, go ahead.
Nicole, I
Yes.
just want to give a perspective, and I'm not sure if you heard my report. Were you there for that?
Was that?
Were you present when I gave my report at the end?
Oh, yes, I was.
Okay.
I heard every bit of it.
Okay, so we understand that Dr. Mendoza doesn't make the laws for us, that New York State Department of Health does. And I think that the predicament that we're in right now is, for example, is that the state does have that language in for barriers. And there's a lot of concerns, obviously, different opinions about barriers. And so, for example, one of the biggest hotbeds for COVID are call centers. And call centers are probably the most similar to classrooms. And call centers have barriers around their areas. All all barriers aren't created equal. And if you look at the guidance, they have to be in the front, back, left, and right. And you have to take into consideration, not
okay, so the state, so you're telling me the state okays barriers, but you have decided that you are not using them. So on what authority is the board deciding that barriers are not okay? Because the state has said they're okay.
So I guess I would end with this, Nicole. I think that the state is going to come out with more clarification around barriers, but no one on the board are epidemiologists. None of us are doctors that can make the determination. So we look, just like everything else in this district, we look for the professionals to give us best practices. And in this arena, we ask for our local health commissioner to give us a best practice, and he does not believe barriers would be.
But your local health commissioner has now said publicly that he has nothing to do with it, and it's between you and the state. And the state has given you guidance saying you can use barriers, and yet you are not doing it. And there is a school in this same state, very similar to you, who is opening now, who has made an announcement, and nobody on this board has given me an adequate answer yet as to why you are not doing that as well, as to why you are not going forward with what the state guidelines allow you to do. No, you're not experts, you're not epidemiologists, but I hope the state employs them in creating their guidelines in the first place, in which they allow barriers. So why are you overruling the state? Why is the board overruling the state of New York?
I guess I would also wonder if there's 722 districts, that why all 722 aren't just using barriers right now. There's a reason, Nicole, and the reason is...
There's a lot of districts using barriers. You know that. You know that there are many districts using barriers very close to in the Finger Lakes district, right?
Okay, Nicole, it's way beyond 3 minutes. I think we've answered. I think we've answered your questions. It's unfortunate.
No, you haven't answered my questions.
All right.
Actually, no, you haven't.
Well,
no, you haven't. For the record, no, you haven't.
Okay, if you would like to schedule a time to speak with me directly, I'm more than happy to do so.
Oh, you're not ruled by the CDC. We already went through that. Because if you were, you wouldn't have sports.
I don't know. Okay, Nicole?
You would be banning all sports if you were following CDC guidelines, you would be banning all sports.
Okay, Nicole?
Because that's what they say to do.
Nicole, if you would like to schedule a time to speak with me, I'm more than willing to speak with you.
I would love to.
Okay, my phone number is on the website. You may call me at any time. Okay? Thank you. Next person. Oh, boy. Hi, Vicki. Hi, Vicki. Oh, you're muted again. Can you unmute, please?
Okay.
There you go. If you could just state your address for us, please. And
yes, Vicki Better.
And
24.
Go ahead.
24 McCord Woods Drive, Fairport.
Thank you. And Vicki, if you could just adhere to the 3-minute.
Okay. I'll skip all the platitudes then. I'm here as a taxpayer looking for fiscal accountability and advocating for all students to be in school 5 days. I'm actually reporting from the state of Florida at the moment, who has their students, all their students in school 5 days. So clearly this is a political agenda going on here. But I'll circle back to that point. Back to the fiscal accountability. So last year, the district reported that there, according to my calculations, based on the auditor's report, there was a $10 million surplus carried over into this year's budget. This year, school for this year, the school's not been fully open. All services haven't been used, therefore, there should be another surplus. Although I haven't seen a report yet what the P&L is looking like. And third, tonight I heard that there's going to be a proposed budget that is going to be approximately 2% increase, which is basically, you know, a slap in the face of the taxpayers. Also hearing that there's no concrete plans for schools to be fully open. You're just wishing that somebody's going to wave a wand and all our kids will be back in school. Well, I think we've learned that we cannot count on the politicians to make that happen. Therefore, I just am giving you notice that there are many people across the state who is going to send a message to the politicians, to the school districts. We want our schools open fully, and there will be a massive campaign to vote no on school board budgets across the state in May.
Okay, Vicki, is that your statement?
That is. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next.
I do.
Oh, okay, I didn't know you were
And I share this, Vicki. I appreciate that. You emailed me a similar message, and I shared your vote is your decision. But I would say this is that your numbers are not accurate. We've actually had to fund $1.5 million extra in staffing for 3 temporary learning models this year. Talking about a surplus we're just not on the same level of understanding with what it takes to run a school during a pandemic, and I'm not sure what I haven't shared that I need to share with you to help you understand. So I'm not sure if that will ever happen. I would also say that that you can vote no, and if the community wanted to vote no, then I would say, boy, shame on us, because the year that we're going to need students to come back with more supports than ever is going to be next year. So we're here for kids. We are fighting for kids, and we just have a different opinion on how that looks. So I do appreciate your involvement. I appreciate your persistence and coming to public comment. We're just not seeing eye to eye on this, but I do want to thank you for sharing your input.
Mike, are you disagreeing with my calculation of the 10 million surplus? Or is Daryl there?
It's Darren, and he's here,
Darren,
but
excuse me.
Vicki, if you'd like to be in touch with Darren, I'm sure that he would be more than happy to answer your question.
Well, I think that you should be transparent with the taxpayers, especially right now when you're putting forth a budget that you expect us to vote on.
So Vicki, let me just share one thing, because now I feel like we're grandstanding, and I'm not happy about that at all. I'll share that we're in the midst of a comptroller's audit, and the first thing that they shared with us is that every community member should be so thankful because they haven't seen any other district as transparent as us. So how you define transparent is certainly not what one of the hardest groups of people that look at us with a fine-tuned comb does. And so our auditors, and we're still getting audited, but they are blown away by how transparent we are. So if you want to make a statement, please, you have every time you've been on public comment, and I can't change how you feel, but I can promise you this: we are fiscally responsible. We are coming out under the tax cap again. We are running 3 different learning models. We're working harder than ever. We're advocating. We're trying to bring the community together. And some people want to tear us apart, and we're not going to let that happen anymore.
Thank you, Vicki. Okay. Hi, Jen.
Hey everyone, I'm Jen Canning, 21 Wrights Parkway. Thanks for letting me speak. I know it's a really long night, and there's a lot of great information presented, which I know is why one of the reasons why we're still here at 9:40, and that's why I have a lot of questions about what was presented. But I've narrowed my question down to one, even though it has 3 parts. So. And it really jumps off something that Mr. Aresti touched on in terms of Mrs. Potter's work. So my question is, how does the work of Ms. Potter integrate with the county superintendent's statement on accelerated professional development, which is absolutely necessary in conjunction with the rollout of these curriculum changes that were talked about? Also, how does it work with the Inclusivity Advisory Council and the recommendations from Generation Ready that I know were received but haven't been shared with the PTSA yet? The second part of the question is, how will Ms. Potter's work incorporate continued involvement of families and students with some of the things she mentioned, like the self-assessment and the restorative justice practices? And the third piece is about a timeline for the overall plan. When will we know when some of these pieces will be rolling out, and when can families expect to work with Ms. Potter so that that transparency continues and she's able to hear directly from the stakeholders as she talked about in her presentation.
Mike?
So I'm not sure how to answer all of those, Jen. That was sneaky of you to throw all of those under one umbrella. I should have said if some of those pieces can't be answered tonight, an email later would be fine. But I thought while it's in the front of our minds and those presentations just happened, I did want to make sure to bring them up. So we just engaged with Tasha recently, and what we've been doing is sharing information with her. The questions that you've asked are areas that we've acknowledged that we want her to be part of, and so it's been more of questions. So when you ask about stakeholder input or feedback or connections or engagement, I shared with her, and so did the board, that that's an area that we want to improve. And so that's on the table with her. And other than that, we've asked her to attend different meetings to try to get a feel for the district. She's seen our committee, some of our committee's work. We're developing a relationship. We've committed to her for 1.5 years at least. She's not overstretched by any means. We're one of few districts that will be working with her. So we're very fortunate to have her almost full-time for the end, from now until the end of the year. So we have meetings set up to talk about strategy, because what you're asking for are questions that would be answered in a strategic plan. And so those are the things that we're in discussion with right now. I'm sorry to be vague, but we've met 3 times. She's getting to know us, we're getting to know her, and we're working on those types of plans as we speak. And it will be ongoing.
Okay, and I know that this is a continued focus of the board, and I know there's other things to focus on, but I just want to remind everyone about the urgency, and I know I'm impatient, but we want to keep it moving, and I look forward to seeing those strategic planning notes as they come out. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
And Jen, I'm hoping that you did see tonight the work that is happening. And the work that is ongoing, specific to one of the big ticket items, which is the curriculum work. I also don't, and I do not want to come across defensive at all, because I'm not, because we have a lot of work to do. But I will share that every consultant we've worked with that has seen what we've been doing is very, very impressed with the work that we're doing. And we want to be the best in this. We want to have people feel included. We want people to feel involved. We're working towards that, and we're not operating from a deficit mode, but we want to be the best in this, just like we're the best in a lot of things as a district. We are very prideful in leading in all areas, and equity is going to be the next area that we're going to be leaders in. I guarantee that. So as information is available, know that we're working on it, and we'll be as transparent as we possibly can with it.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jen. Okay. Hi,
Hi, can
Dadaha.
you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi. So Dadaha Davakumar, pronouns she, her, hers, and I live at 3 Warder Drive in Pittsford.
Thank you.
And I am excited to hear about the curriculum update and the equity policy, and I'm excited to review that tomorrow at the IAC meeting. But I did have a question on the social studies curriculum, and you may not have the answer, just like Jen's questions, and that's okay. But the full day training in April that was mentioned, is that training also going to include training on like hidden bias, cultural competency, and like white fragility for the teachers in addition to the curriculum contents? Yes.
I haven't seen the exact agenda for the training. I will tell you that all of those concepts have been a significant part of the training that the writers have gone through as they've put the inquiries together. And I do know that the training that is being proposed for this summer will be probably a little more extensive than the training this spring for the piloters of the curriculum. But I know that just part of their embedded in the curriculum work that the group has been doing has been a lot of training around implicit bias, et cetera.
Okay, yeah, it was more concerned about those teachers that will be teaching it, just to make sure it's also on their training as well.
Yes, and again, I haven't seen the agenda, so I can't speak exactly to what that will look like, but I can only imagine that a full day of training to prepare social studies teachers to teach these inquiries will include that, some level of that work as well.
I was hoping so too, but I didn't want to assume, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Thadaha.
Yep.
And anyone else?
Lastly, there's something from someone from Pittsford PTSA.
Okay. Hi, Sarah. You're muted.
I
There
know,
you go.
I knew that.
There you go.
Should have known. Sorry. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I'm Sarah Lucio, 5 Trailwood Circle. I just wanted to start by saying thank you to all of you for your advocacy efforts to gain metrics to reopen our schools more fully. I know what a struggle it's been, and I appreciate everything that you're doing along those lines. I'd also like to formally announce that I'm seeking election to the Pittsford Board of Education this spring. As a lifelong resident of Pittsford and a graduate of Sutherland High School, I have a vested interest in the success of our schools. Now, as a mother of 3 young Pittsford students, I am fully engaged in their education. Through my involvement with Pittsford PTSA, including my current role as PTSA president, I have acquired extensive knowledge of the intricacies of our district in which to continue to support the future success of Pittsford schools as a member of the Board of Education. I have the utmost respect for our current Board of Education members and would be honored to serve with you. Thank you.
That's exciting, Sarah. Thank you for making, I know, thank you for stepping up to this election season. Okay. Anyone else, Anthony? Okay. With that, we will shut public comment down. And if there's nothing else, may I have a motion to adjourn, please? Thanks, Ted. And who else? I saw a lot of hands go up. Pat Brogan's hand, video. We've got Anthony. Everyone at the table is all in favor. Everybody in the room. Okay.